Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second day of the Montana University System Board of Regents meeting. We had a fantastic breakfast meeting with the community members, and for all of you who joined us last night with Chancellor Kegel on the opening of the Diesel Technology Center, I hope you are still feeling the celebration and the pride that exists on this fabulous campus with the accomplishments that are that occurred not in the just recent past, but the future that is very bright for MSU Northern. At this moment, I would like to turn the table over to Chair of the ARSA Committee, Regent Sheehy.
Thank you. We have a full agenda. We're getting a little bit of a late start. I don't want that to count against me. Let's get started with our action items. Our first item is the Level 2 Executive Summary. These are the Level 2 approval process. Before we move into the actual items, I'd like to call upon Deputy Commissioner Seck to give us a little bit of updated information.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy and members of the board. I have for you a chart that I would like you to take a look at, and because I think it speaks to the success of the work that we've been doing over the past few years with academic program planning, the new academic program planning and approval process, and academic program prioritization. And I would just like to point out academic year 2015 and 16, when we had 81 new programs which were approved in the system, and 30 which were placed in moratorium or termination for a net increase of 51 programs. Moved to this year, and this is the numbers for this year are based on the assumption that everything that's before you today will be approved. So just for conversation point, I included them. For academic year 17-18, we'll have 16 new programs, 13 placed in moratorium and termination for a net of 3 programs. So this board expressed concerns about 3 years ago about program creep and that the fact that the campuses really weren't taking a look very carefully internally at their programs. And I think this just, to me, really shows that the work that the campuses are doing, the new planning and approval process that you approved, and the system-wide effort at program prioritization is working. So, Madam Chair, I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the board.
Thank you, John. Let's look at the Level 2 Executive Summary, supporting documentation. We have several items up for review. Dr. Seck, do you have people ready?
Yes, Madam Chair, each of the campuses will be sending an individual forward to present the programs, but to save us a little time, I would just like to mention that beginning with Flathead Valley Community College, we have a request for authorization to establish a certificate of applied science in practical nursing. And then if you go down, you'll see the same thing for MSU Billings, and you'll see the same thing for Great Falls College, MSU. That is a part of the Healthcare Montana grant curriculum revision. All of the nursing directors for the 2-year campuses across the state have been working on this curricular revision, and so this is a process that they've been working on for the past 2 years and are coming forward. So my suggestion would be, unless the board has questions, maybe we look at those as a group, and we may not even need anyone to speak to those.
I agree. Could you explain the transition that those 3 items pose?
Absolutely. Previously, under the model nursing curriculum that was developed close to 10 years ago, practical nursing was simply an exit point for students who were accepted to pursue an Associate of Science RN degree. And those are highly competitive programs, and once accepted into an Associate of Science RN degree, students, they maybe will sit after the first year for the PN exam and maybe practice part-time, but their interest is being an RN. So as the Healthcare Montana team reached out to hospitals and nursing homes across the state, we found that we were basically starving them. We were not providing them with practical nurses. So what the faculty did is they created a certificate of applied science in practical nursing that's really focused on people who want to be practical nurses. In the design of that curriculum, there's still a pathway for them to pursue an RN completion if they want to do that. But this is really meeting industry needs. And I will say this, I spoke at the Montana Hospital Association's annual retreat just last week in Big Fork, which had most of the CEOs from the hospitals in the state, and they applauded this work because they said, you were starving us. We are having to hire locums for practical nurses, and that's very expensive.
So we're referring to the Flathead Valley Community College, the Montana State University Billings, and the Great Falls College Montana State University items here on this same program. 4 of us sit on this committee. We had a fairly lengthy discussion about it at our committee meeting. So unless Fran and Bob, do you have any questions about this? Okay. Any questions from the board? Okay. So those 3 items will move forward. Next on the list is Flathead Valley Community College's request for authorization to revise the AAS in medical assistant to CAS.
And do we have the Chief Academic Officer for Flathead with us? Oh, there's Chris.
Good morning. We've had an AAS in medical assisting for 22 years. It started off mostly on the office side of the house, and as that job has evolved to add more clinical responsibilities, we kept adding and adding to the curriculum until we found there were a lot of redundancies. So we recently we reviewed the curriculum and decided to eliminate redundancies and reduce it down to a CAS so that students could complete the program in only 3 semesters. We have great need for medical assistants in the Valley. And so we had an active advisory committee who thought that this was a great idea. We will maintain our accreditation, and our students will still be able to sit for the national exam.
Thank you. Could you state your name, please?
Chris Klaus.
Chris, thank you. Any questions? No? Regents? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
We'll move that forward. Next, Dawson Community College, request for authorization to establish an AAS and certificates in rural organization and employee management.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Mossow from DCC. Over the past year, we've done some research. We've held some advisory committee meetings and a DACOM, and we found the need for the Rural Organization Employee Management Program. This program is designed to provide rural organizations the knowledge, skills, and applications they need to better manage people and human resources in their organizations. Courses from our business program will give participants the needed management skills, while the newly developed human resources certificate will develop the successful human resource generalists. Rome will attract both traditional and non-traditional students using a stackable credential model. It's offered online. It can be offered on campus through a hybrid model. We have a Rome certificate, the human resource certificate, and it all leads into the Associate of Applied Science degree.
Any questions, Regents?
Just
Regent Greenfield?
Excuse me. Just a comment from me. I would just say in reviewing the supporting documentation for this, it stood out to me that the demand section was extremely well developed, and I think would be a great example going forward. As we talk about our program review process, I think that would be a good one to track and see how well those projections turned out, and I think this is a good example for that conversation that we'll get into later this committee meeting.
Anyone else? I'd like to comment that, we did talk about this at ARSA, but I would like the other members of the board to know how well-developed this was and really is filling a need. We've had a lot of discussion about its potential for economic development and the benefits of this stackable credential model. So thank you for your work. We'll move that forward. Next, we're going to, on your items, we've already looked at Montana State University billing, so we'll move forward to, I think we're on Great Falls College, request for authorization to establish an AAS in computer programming. We've skipped over two if you're looking for this.
We have Heidi Pasek.
Welcome, Heidi.
Good morning. I'm Heidi Pasek from Great Falls College MSU. This is a program that we originally had approved on the level 1 temporary approval back in 2016. We started the program with 9 students. Those 9 students graduated at our graduation a couple of weeks ago. So that was wonderful to see them walk across the stage. In the meantime, we were able to hire another faculty member, and the program is just busting at the seams. We have a lot of need in Great Falls in technology, manufacturing, and this is something that we've really been working on. So we'd like to bring that before the board for final approval as a level 2.
Thank you. Any questions? Regent Lozar.
Just a question on the status of a temporary approval. Is that something that we do on the Board of Regents, or is that a temporary approval at the campus level?
Chair Sheehy, Regent Lozar, that is in board policy, so the board does allow the campuses, the 2-year campuses, so that they can react to industry needs, that it does grant temporary approval for 2 years, and then the campuses can come back with the level 2.
We've already granted temporary approval to this. This is permanent approval, just to clarify? Okay.
One further clarification with that, correct me if I'm wrong, Deputy Commissioner Sec, but that's a level 1 approval, correct?
When the temporary approval is level 1, yeah.
Any other questions? Again, we had a long discussion about this, or a longer discussion at the ARSA Committee, and for those of you who aren't on that committee, again, I want you to understand that this has been vetted, and Heidi, you've done a great job, so thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move that forward. Next item. University of Montana, Missoula, request for authorization to establish a dual BS/MS in neuroscience.
Good morning, Madam
morning.
Chair, Regents. I'm Paul Kurgis, the acting provost at the University of Montana. This is an accelerated degree in neuroscience. We currently have both of these degrees. We have a BS in neuroscience as well as an MS in neuroscience. The purpose of this change is to allow students to complete both degrees in 5 years instead of the typical 6. They will complete exactly the same master's degree. It's the same 30 credits. The way they are able to do this is some of their graduate credits, which they will take in their 4th year of undergrad, will count toward the undergraduate degree. This type of program is offered at a number of universities around the country, but to date there are none in the Pacific Northwest. So there's an opportunity and a need for this kind of degree, and it will accelerate students' progression to the master's, from which they can either go into the private world immediately in pharmaceutical companies or other entities, or pursue advanced degrees, PhDs, or medical degrees.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? I'd like to comment that the discussion we had earlier really talked about how this accelerates the program for the students. It's very student-centered, helpful to everyone involved, and I appreciate the fact that you've identified this and done the work to move on towards it. Shall we move this along then? All right. Thank you very much. Next is, oh, maybe you're still here.
Yes.
Next is also University of Montana. This is the request for authorization to change the MIS to an MS or an MA.
Yes, we currently have a degree that's a master's in interdisciplinary studies. It allows students to create their own major where there isn't a particular specific degree that they're interested in pursuing. The trend nationally is to move these types of degrees, which are common, into an MA or an MS in interdisciplinary studies so that the degree looks the same as what other students have on their transcripts.
Any questions, comments? Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy. In terms of the MS or the MA, is that just based on the very specifics of the type of projects that they're will be working on?
Yeah, so some students will have a greater focus in humanities areas and choose an MA, and then some will have a more scientific focus and choose the MS.
No other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next program is from the University of Montana Western, request for authorization to revise the BS in Environmental Interpretation to a BS in Environmental Sustainability. Do we have Deb here? Oh, did I miss one?
I think so.
MS and material science.
I think there were a few others.
Okay. John, where are you on your list?
Madam Chair, next would be Montana Tech request to establish an MS in Materials Science and Engineering. And I believe Dr. Hartline is here.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Madam Chair, Regents. I'm Beverly Hartline. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Research and Dean of the Graduate School at Montana Tech. Our provost is out of the country at this time. Montana University, but the Montana Board of Regents approved the Montana University System PhD in Materials Science at the May meeting in 2013, and that program opened its doors in the fall of 2014 with 9 students. It's now grown to 31 students, and I'm very proud to report that at least 2 of those students completed all the requirements for the degree this spring, and an additional student is defending his dissertation next week. So this program is really off to a good start with 3 students finishing within about 4 years. However, there are several bachelor's programs in the system at many different campuses that feed nicely into a material science graduate program, but the only program available right now is the PhD. And so this proposal from Montana Tech fills that gap, and it will serve as both an on-ramp to the PhD program for students who are interested going that direction, science and engineering, working for industry, working for government, but aren't sure they're really up to the challenge of a doctoral program. And in addition, we all know that many people start highly committed to a doctoral program, but things don't work out. Sometimes its personal life gets in the way. And most of our campuses have an interdisciplinary master's, which can serve as an off-ramp, but really that doesn't serve those students really well in terms of seeking jobs. Oh, interdisciplinary, what does that mean? We want to hire somebody in material science, and then you have a longer conversation. So this program would provide a credential that's in demand by fast-growing high-tech industries in Montana, also elsewhere. It would have a thesis option, a non-thesis option, and the availability of the program by distance for working professionals seeking advancement but unable to leave their job for whatever reason to move to somewhere where they can do the degree. I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Any questions, comments? Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, next up on the list is Helena College, University of Montana.
Mary Leonard will present for Helena College.
This is a request for permanent authorization of the CAS in sheet metal apprenticeship.
Good morning. So we are requesting that this become a permanent program or change to the CAS. We started the program in 2014-15 as an AAS, and after the first year and working with the instructors and the local employers in our advisory councils, it was determined that this would be better served as a CAS rather than the AAS. And so we asked for the temporary approval and have worked to redesign this program so that there is more online, there's less travel for those students around our area to come in, and we feel that this would be better served in this way. So we're asking for the permanent. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're up to you, Deb. This is the University of Montana Western request for authorization to revise the BS in Environmental Interpretation to BS in Environmental Sustainability.
Good morning, Chair Sheehy and members of the board. The University of Montana Western has had a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Interpretation since 1998, and we are proposing a degree title name change to Environmental Sustainability. The program will include a new 24-credit option, Environmental Interpretation, which is a blending of the existing Geological Naturalists and Biological Naturalists options into a single option. The majority of the courses for the option already exist, and the total degree is 120 credits. The degree revisions will enhance both recruitment and employability.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, that, I believe, is the end of the level twos. Well, before moving on, I'd like to comment that it was really gratifying to hear everyone go through the process, and almost everyone talked about the coordinating they've done with the communities and the feedback that they've gotten from the local employers. I think that's one of the most important aspects of the level two, so I appreciated that very much. Let's move on to the mission statement. Missoula.
All right, Madam Chair and fellow regents, as it's an exciting time actually to be at the University of Montana, as this body's aware. Upon joining the University of Montana, I reconstituted our University Planning Committee. We have several members of that group with representation across shared governance groups across the campus. What this process has confirmed for me, and I think for us, is that we are an institution both positioned to continue our excellence and to pursue some bold and exciting change. So the UPC, as we've called it, had a two-part charge to develop number one, a clear and compelling mission and identity for the university, as well as a mechanism to assess our academic programs right now and on an ongoing basis. For the first part of the charge, the University Planning Committee built upon the work of the past 2 years with the Strategic Planning Coordinating Committee and the APASP task force, which this body has heard of multiple reports. More than 4,000 points of feedback in both of those processes from campus stakeholders, from community stakeholders, from really a broad suite of individuals with interest in the university. Developed a refreshed mission statement, which I'll go into in just a few minutes, as well as a clear articulation of our identity and some points of distinction for the university, and some preliminary recommendations. Where we are in this process is we have received about 1,000 points of additional feedback, even more than 1,000 points of feedback from various stakeholders across the campus. We are incorporating the feedback on those recommendations over the summer. We have come to alignment on a refreshed mission statement at this point that we want to submit to the board for approval. And I just want to emphasize a few points in that, because as you read the statement, a few things come out that are important to the university. And first and foremost is, right in that first line, is that the transforming of lives by providing a high quality education that's accessible accessible to different people from different walks of life, different backgrounds. One of the things that is, I think, so special about the Montana University system and the University of Montana, as ours with our other campuses, as we heard this morning, is that our universities provide opportunity and they provide pathways. One thing that I'm so proud to say is that we have at the University of Montana programs that are better than programs at some of the best universities in the land. We happen to have the #1 wildlife biology program in North America, for example. I could cite these programs, and if one so chooses, they can get a better education at one of our universities, and I'll speak for the University of Montana, but I know I speak for the other campuses as well, than one could get at the Harvards, the Stanfords of the world. But one thing that we're never going to do is stand up and brag about the fact that we only accept 5% or 10% of the people that apply to the University of Montana. And we are about providing access to a high-quality education and opportunity. And that's really important for us to have that in there. The second piece is that we have undergraduate, graduate, professional studies, teaching and research with a strong liberal arts foundation, providing a whole-of-person education that prepares students for an uncertain future. And that is something that we are seeing a great deal of interest in and enthusiasm for designing taking a hard look at our gen ed curriculum, our core curriculum, and saying how do we as a university, regardless of discipline, regardless of whether you're going to be an accountant, a pharmacist, a biologist, a neuroscientist, that when you leave the University of Montana, you're prepared for an uncertain, a dynamic future. And that's a key component of this as well, and that is the creative and agile learners. And I think the final point is that this mission statement stresses our commitment to community, service to the region and its people, not just to promote economic development, but thought leaders committed to solving some of our states, our nation's most sticky problems. So we've had a lot of good, positive discussion around the mission statement, and we feel ready for approval of the mission statement at this point, while we work and adjust and continue to incorporate feedback on the recommendations over the summer and into the fall.
Thank you, President Bodner. I see that you have a committee here. If they have anything to add to that, or should we just open it up for questions? Okay. I do appreciate you being here in case there are questions. Any questions or comments from the regents? Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy. President Bodner, when you look back on the 1,000 points of feedback that you got on this particular mission statement, were there a couple themes that you saw that came out of that feedback that the group grappled with, and sort of what were those resolutions?
Yeah, I think and I'll offer it up to the group as well. We have four introductions. I apologize for not introducing everyone individually, but we have our acting provost, Paul Kurgis. We have our chair of our faculty senate, Matt Siminoff, and Alex Butler, our ASUM president. So Alex has been a senator and newly elected president of ASUM. So the 1,000 points were for the recommendations overall. For the mission statement, I think we had a lot of discussion around the 3 points that I mentioned. A lot of discussion around this idea of access, this idea of social mobility being core to what the University of Montana provides. Talking about how the university, secondly, talking about how the university can best incorporate the strength of a broad-based interdisciplinary liberal arts and sciences background with a world-class research university. That being a great point of distinction for the university, but how to articulate it clearly in the mission statement, that a student that comes to the University of Montana can experience really the best of a small liberal arts college with the benefits of being at a world-class research university, and how to get that in there, and as well as this idea of expanding the boundaries of knowledge and building and sustaining diverse communities. So those points that I mentioned, I think, were the points that we spent quite a bit of time talking about really over a period of months, as a university planning committee, we had lots of interim updates. So I mentioned 1,000 points of feedback just on the preliminary recommendations that we released in April, but we probably had another 1,000 or so in the interim stages as we went through the process, really with weekly updates after every meeting we had, sharing that with campus, having very open meetings that everyone sat in and met much public participation. So I don't know, gentlemen, if you would add other comments.
Good morning. I'm Matthew Semenoff, and I'm the chair of the Faculty Senate. And I would just like to follow up with what President Bodnar was saying, that the process leading up to the preliminary recommendations in April involved bringing, incremental drafts to the Faculty Senate, and the themes that arose in the February meeting and then the March meeting prior even to the general release really did focus on how to combine the work that is done at the undergraduate level and that core curriculum with the professional education and the graduate education and the research that is done across campus. And I think that this mission statement reflects that theme, trying to combine all those different aspects of what we do at the University of Montana accurately and with the desires that were raised among faculty members who are weighing in on the process. And then one final comment about the really discussing how we articulate the challenge of what our students will someday face in terms of the fact that their futures, they're going to be leading us and they're going to be guiding our futures as well. They're the people who are following us down the line, and that there's going to need to be a discussion of the problems and the challenges that we face, and that we're trying to help them achieve the capacities to answer those challenges for us.
Thank you. Regent Greenfield.
Thank you. I don't have a question for you all, but simply a comment. The first piece of that would be a thank you on behalf of former Regent Johnstone and his request for urgency. I'm glad to see that the University of Montana is moving forward with this so early in President Bodnar's tenure. I look forward to hopefully seeing the rest of the UPC recommendations coming before this body in the near future, but I won't be there to review them myself. President Bodnar and I had a brief talk a little bit about some of the UPC findings, and I'll share a piece in public here with what I shared with him there, is that I think that one piece that I feel like is missing in the UPC's work is the inverse of what President Bodnar described, of a strong professional focused student with a strong humanities and liberal arts background. I am personally the inverse case of a strong humanities student with a well-developed professional and research background augmentation on top of that. I would just worry that that piece of the puzzle is not included based on the documents I have reviewed so far. And I would think that that is something important to move forward as well, that the humanities and arts students get that professional background that they need as well to enter the workforce and develop their careers. And I think that's an important piece of the University of Montana's identity, and I know it's been critical for me and countless other students throughout the history of the institution as well. So I would just encourage some further looking into that piece of this. I think this mission statement is broad enough to encompass that, but the other pieces are worth looking at a little bit more detail. So thank you.
And I think it's a great point, Madam Chair, Regent Greenfield. The work that we're really excited to move forward on is really examining our core curriculum and how do we, again, regardless of discipline, prepare students for an uncertain future. So the English or philosophy major, one of the things or one of the people that I've cited repeatedly through this process is the soon-to-be former president of Harvard, Drew Faust, who has said that a college is at its best when it prepares students not just for their first job, but for their fourth or fifth job, often a job that doesn't exist today or one that they will create themselves. And I think for our for some of our humanities majors, one of the challenges may be that first job, getting to that first job, but then recognizing that the value of that education will be integral in the fourth and fifth job. But looking at both of those is a great point.
Regent Tuss?
Thank you. I'm supportive of this, and I like this mission statement a lot. And I know that mission statements transcend existing issues, current issues that in 6 months or a year are going to be in the rearview mirror. But I am curious, based on conversations that this board has had with faculty and students and folks that love the University of Montana, particularly the liberal arts nature, historic nature of this institution. How is that being preserved? I mean, the very core, the very foundation of the University of Montana within that liberal arts tradition, within some of the current difficulties the institution is having, just from a budget perspective, because we're hearing about that. And so I'm curious about how, I mean, this is a great mission statement, and I think that this is going to pass, but I think we need to ask that question.
President Bodnar?
Yes, Madam Chair, Regent Tuss. Absolutely. We agree with that. And you can see we have that as part of the mission statement. And we have preliminary recommendations that really are for alignment of resources to best meet student needs. Through this process, what has been core to every question we've asked is, how can we best support the needs of our students, and how do we best align our resources? How are we effective stewards of our tuition dollars and our student fees to best align with where our students are? So what we've done through this, you'll recognize in the preliminary recommendations, we went with a path that didn't go for large-scale program elimination, which was one of the options. Frankly, we want to sustain our programs. However, there are areas in which we have lower enrollments where there will be a reduction in certain areas, but with maintaining high quality and the effectiveness of those programs. And those are the discussions we're having right now with each of the departments of how best to do that. I think it's important to note, we talk about our College of Humanities and Sciences, H&S. Our H&S would say that H&S stands for not just humanities and sciences, but heart and soul of the University of Montana. Today, the College of Humanities and Sciences represents about 52% of our faculty. Even with reductions that would be, because that's the largest part, more heavily weighted there, it would be, even in the initial set of recommendations, still 50% of our faculty. But we are, again, in a process of refining these recommendations with a keen eye to making sure that we preserve the heart and soul of the university, but best align our resources to meet our students' needs. I don't know if anyone would like to add to that. Okay.
Well, I didn't have anything, I guess, to add to that. So, but I had a point I was going to make later, so I can always pivot to someone else if they wanted to speak on that point. No.
Go ahead, Alex.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the 2 points that I wanted to touch on is student involvement throughout this whole process, and also I think kind of my take on this mission statement and how I think it does prepare students for your long-run career. And so student involvement throughout this process has been fairly heavy. So during the APAS process, we had 4 student task force members, one of them being Regent Greenfield, and also former ASU President Braden Fitzgerald, and also another undergraduate, Anissa Ricci, and a graduate student, Eric Johnston, that were all on the task force members for APAS. And then we had 8 student reviewers of all the reports as well, along with 8 faculty and 8 staff. And so I thought we helped in generate all this data and understanding of where the university was at throughout that process. And then most recently, during the UPC process, outgoing president, Brandon Fitzgerald, was also the co-chair of the mission identity subgroup. So in this subgroup, he was the co-chair of coming up with this mission statement. And then we also had 2 other students, both that were on the data subgroup, one being a graduate, one being an undergraduate student as well. So students have been involved in this whole process, and then once the first draft of the strategy for distinction came out, both acting provost Paul Kurgis and then incoming provost John Harbour both came to an ASUM Senate meeting, and the Senate had probably an hour and a half or so to ask questions, and they took all the questions with them. And I thought that was a really engaging experience between our Senate and both the provosts and their positions. But then also the next week, then President Bodnar came and took questions not just from senators, but also to students that were there to speak as well. And so they were receiving feedback from us in those 2 instances, but then also all of the minutes during those from both those meetings. And then we had a meeting after that where we discussed it even further. Or no, wait, we discussed it later after you left, President Bodnar. Those were all submitted along with other points from students as well. So they've been very inclusive along the way of hearing student feedback and really making sure that they're engaging with students that this is going to affect. As far as the mission statement and preparing students for the long haul when it comes to career, I've been lucky enough to serve on 2 search committees recently for our provost and then currently for our vice president for enrollment and strategic communications. And I've realized that the better jobs you want down the road get a little bit harder to apply for. It's a long process. You have to be a strong writer. You have to articulate your point. You have to be creative. You have to be bold. And I do think a liberal arts background provides that and helps you prepare for those long-term, for your long-term career, and helps you prepare for those moments when you're having to write a long letter of intent and answer tough questions and be creative. And so I do think the liberal arts background prepares you well for that. And so I'm excited to see this because I do think that creative and agile learning piece is very important for navigating the future.
Thank you. Any other comments? President Bodnar, I really appreciate this coming before us. I'm supportive of the statement. I also am really supportive of the fact that this process has been so incredibly open. I know it's difficult sometimes, and having meeting after meeting and really opening it up, but it does in fact make for a better result, and it makes for more buy-in in the long run to actually hear the people. And in addition to just meeting the technical requirements of open meeting, it's clear to me that you're listening as a group and as a campus to each other. That can be uncomfortable, but I heartily support it. I look forward to the next phase of this process, and I think this item is ready to move on.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important as well to acknowledge and to thank our shared governance groups through this process. I mean, it takes 2 to engage in a process of shared governance. In fact, it takes 4. But it's such an important part of this process, and we're continuing, and we're going to continue to evolve. This is not I think it's important also to note there's no kind of you snap the line, then you're done adjusting, right? This is something that we, as a university, as a community, will adjust, we'll tweak, we'll make changes, but we'll do so as a team and through the thoughtful collaboration. So thank you.
And with that reminder, I do want to thank everyone involved in this process, especially the ones who appeared before us today. So thank you very much for all of your hard work. Our next item is informational. All of the next items are informational. We'll start with Common Course numbering update. Deputy Commissioner Seck.
Madam Chair, members of the board, as you may recall, back in March, we had a good discussion about Common Course numbering and the fact that this is a great thing. Montana's one of the few states in the country that enjoys Common Course numbering. However, over the years, it has atrophied. There are some challenges and some issues. And so when the chief academic officers and I met before the board meeting in Dillon in March, we set as a goal as May 19, a year from now, that this problem will be fixed. So Mr. Teal has gladly accepted that challenge. No, not only Joe, but all of the chief academic officers and the campuses. So I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Teal and Dr. Lindsay, and they'll take it from here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Sack. Chair Sheehy, Commissioner, members of the board. Fortunately, there is a pretty great group of registrars, of Common Course numbering liaisons, provost office staff that have really taken this goal seriously. Dr. Lindsay and I are here to talk about some of the work that's already happening, some of our ideas for the fall on how we're going to achieve that goal. I thought it'd be useful to start with some history of Common Course numbering. So this entire effort began 2004, 2005 with a legislative audit, an audit of transferability in the Montana university system. And what those auditors found was that transfer for students in Montana wasn't predictable at that time. And thank goodness the legislature ponied up some money in 2007 so that faculty committees could meet. They could go undergo sometimes a painful, sometimes a difficult process of comparing their courses, determining which courses should be equivalent, and the result is Common Course numbering. And an important place for us all to start is Common Course numbering has addressed a lot of those issues found in that audit. Transfer in this system relative to other states is much more predictable for students. And it's not a small number of students. So about 1 in every 6 of our students will make use of this tool while they're in the university system. It facilitates transfer for around 20,000 courses each year. It makes it so that students and advisors don't have to undergo the really difficult effort of picking apart a transcript one by one. And it's important to note that that benefit to students exists right now. For the issues that we have, this is still a tool that is helping our students get through, helping them make it more predictable for them when they transfer. The issues that we're trying to address are, how do we make sure those benefits exist 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line? In that process, we've developed some pretty good tools that help to make that happen. So this is on your website. It's a database of courses showing commonly numbered courses across the system, showing which campuses offer them, and for a fair number, showing their learning outcomes. And what you don't see is behind this is a web application that allows me to communicate with Nathan, with his counterparts on other campuses, so that when a new course is proposed, we can identify faculty who can take a look at that course to see whether it's truly unique or whether it should be commonly numbered with a course that's already in our system. And broadly, that process works pretty well. Those comparisons are done on the basis of learning outcomes. So our rule is that if courses overlap in their learning outcomes by 80% or more, they must be commonly numbered. They need to carry the same title, the same rubric, the same number. The issue that Deputy Commissioner Seck referred to is that through history, through mystery, there are many courses in our system where we don't have learning outcomes up to date. Right now, it's around 45% actually. When I pulled this data, it was 47%, but people have been doing some good work. We're making some progress on this. But the underlying question is, we're 10 years in, courses change over time. What ensures that these courses are equivalent? What sort of ongoing review is there? So this group of representatives from every campus have been discussing this question. We've broken it out into really 4 levels of quality control for Common Course numbering that we're going to try and address, or at least have develop an ongoing process so that we can address over time and report to you next year. The first level are all undergraduate courses in the system. And there are, sadly, a fair number of courses that are taught on our campuses that aren't in the Common Course numbering system. Second level is, do all of our courses have up-to-date learning outcomes? So is our database good? Does it list the information it needs to? Third level, are those courses, or at least some of those courses, the courses that are most important, that are transferred the most often, do we have some process that occasionally they're compared to ensure they remain equivalent? And then a fourth level, and this isn't something that Common Course numbering was designed to address, but anecdotally and to some degree in the research literature on transfer, this is probably the problem that most students face, that there's a garden of working paths. There are too many choices of programs for transfer students. And often, even though we have very competent advisors, it's too complex to determine which course should I take now. Even though it's insured to transfer, it might not transfer in such a way that it's useful in the program that they transfer into. It might transfer as an elective course rather than as a program requirement. And so can we develop some tools that address that issue that we think is perhaps some of the frustration that we hear ascribed to Common Course numbering. So we've started to work on this. The Common Course numbering liaisons and the chief academic officers have agreed to these targets on the first two levels. By September 2018, all lower division courses are going to be accurate with up-to-date learning outcomes in the Common Course numbering database. By January, all undergraduate courses are going to be accurate. That sounds like some nice targets. What isn't shown here is the amount of effort that goes into that. So we're talking thousands of courses that people on our campus need to sometimes track down with faculty or write new learning outcomes, go through a process of updating those, reviewing those, and sometimes having conversations about are these learning outcomes that we're bringing into the system, do we need to undergo a more thorough review to see if there are courses that should be equivalent. The third and the fourth levels are a little bit more complicated. And our early presumption was that if we wanted some system to compare courses over time, we need to get that out to the faculty level. They're the people who have the expertise, who are the pedagogues, the folks who can make those comparisons. And so occasionally, for at least some set of courses, we need faculty committees to do a review. And the questions are, how do we arrange that? How do we make that an effective use of our faculty's time? How do we perhaps focus on only the courses that are most important? What technological tools, what cycle? And then for the fourth level, what tools are out there to make this a little more transparent and a little simpler? Talking to some of the two-year colleges, they find it challenging to advise their students because there are differences in similar degree programs across our campuses that make it so either they sometimes have to decide we're going to send our students to one campus and not another because we can't afford to offer the courses required for both, or we have to understand 5 different campuses, different offerings so that we can correctly advise our students. So we looked outside of the system a little bit, and one idea that we're discussing on this approach is to borrow from the SUNY system. And what they did is they brought 2-year and 4-year faculty together in some disciplines where this is commonly an issue, and they said, write down what your requirements are. They don't have to be exactly the same, but can we, at the system level, sort of do what we're doing individually with articulation agreements from each 2-year campus to each 4-year campus, and instead do that in one room and produce a map. And perhaps use that map as a point of conversation between faculty as to how we can make this easier, simpler for students who intend to transfer. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lindsay, who's been working with me and a subgroup from this CCN group to put some meat on the bones of these basic ideas.
So in order to address the level 3 and level 4 questions, as Joe explained, a subgroup was commission, including myself, Charity Walters from Western, Rachel Anderson from MSU Bozeman, and Garth Slight from Miles Community College. And the first activity that we engaged in, that Joe really ran the analysis for, were what were the most commonly transferred courses. If you look at the columns on the left-hand side of this slide, a vast majority of the transfers are happening in areas such as RIT 101, Psych 100, Math 121, and the others listed there. And not surprisingly, the rubrics on the right-hand side overlap with those quite a bit as well. So by addressing just a small number of courses and a small number of rubrics, we actually can capture a lot of the transfers that are happening. So the plan is this fall is to bring together groups of faculty for these disciplines where most transfers are happening, to ask to work with the department chairs to ask which faculty would be most appropriate to bring together, and then to focus on these areas of most common transfer, and also rubrics, as it says here in the second point, that may differ markedly across the disciplines. Another way to say this is the courses that are closely similar or closely equivalent, but are not exactly the same number. Anecdotally, some of those are in education and in computer science, and there may be ways to collapse courses so that there's less of that duplication. This subgroup really has three different charges. One is to compare the outcomes to truly see whether the courses are at 80%, that we have that consistency over time. Number two is for disciplines with bachelor's degrees across the state at multiple institutions, is to develop kind of degree paths, helping students to know what are the recommended courses of study. In other words, by doing that, hopefully they will have to repeat fewer courses when they transfer to other institutions. And the third area is related, is to review all the courses within those heavily traffic rubrics to try to find courses that are duplicative so that we can find greater equivalency. And these second and third points really help to address that fourth question under level 4. Are courses useful in a student's program of study once they transfer? And hopefully by addressing these two areas more effectively, the answer to that question will be yes. So our plan is to work through this coming year, and from these pilots in 5 or so of these areas, we hope to broaden that further and to provide the board with an update a year from now, if not sooner. And so with that, we'll open up for questions.
Anyone have questions? Regent Albrecht.
I want to thank you for targeting this and for leading the charge. This has been a concern that I have heard from students, and we know that this is critically important for retention and completion. And when students are frustrated about the transferability, it really does hinder their ability to stay in school, the affordability as well, and most critically, the completion. I know that I had spoken with Dr. Seck about this, and the atrophy really was a concern. And so it's my understanding, just to clarify, that Joe, you are going to be the key person to keep the eye on the overall quality control and ensure that this will continue forward. Because again, as we know, if we're not focused on something, the progress won't continue. And it's my understanding that the atrophy occurs when we're not focused on, especially some of those new course offerings, and then existing courses that have not been consistent across the board with those outcomes. So can you just speak to your role in ensuring that this continues to carry forward for those reasons?
Yeah, that's safe to say that's on my plate. And I have a feeling that Dr. Seck reaching out from Carroll College, if I'm not doing a good job, is going to make sure I know it. You know, there is atrophy. There are aspects where we've fallen behind, where sometimes we've lapsed. Broadly, it still serves students very well, and broadly, a lot of our processes work quite well. What we're talking about here are, in some cases, some simple fixes that will require some resources, will require some time from campus personnel just to make sure that they stay up to date, and then someone focused at the commissioner's office to track that. But I think that these further conversations that we've been having on how do we bring faculty together to occasionally review, those are related to just basic trust in Common Course numbering. Do we have something where if there is an issue, if there is a course that isn't preparing a student well when they transfer, that we have a process that will catch that? And then I think really what I'm excited about is taking the next step into Common Course numbering addresses one issue with transfer. General ed, our general education policies address another potential issue with transfer. One area that we're missing is this system academic maps idea. Just trying to find tools that maybe could be inexpensive to build, that could bring faculty together around the system in ways that allow them to have productive conversations, where we can provide something to students that make it a little bit simpler in that really complex experience of trying to figure out not just will my courses transfer, but will they transfer and be useful in the program of study that I want to go through. That's an issue that Common Course numbering itself doesn't address, but that alongside fixing Common Course numbering, we might be able to develop some tools that help with.
And as a follow-up?
Yes.
I like that I can also hear you saying that this is also creating a consistency of the brand of MUS, so that if I am a student, no matter where I take that course, that quality and that outcome is going to be there, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Albrecht. Regent Greenfield?
Thank you. I've served on enough review committees to know that some faculty are not a big fan of Common Course numbering, so much so that one time during APAS, in crafting our final document, someone tried to slip in, and we should delete Common Course numbering, and I had to fight that back. But I really quickly just want to give a big shout out to Montana State University. Looking at this chart provided to us, they have 13 courses missing outcomes and over 2,137 courses that have the Common Course numbering, and I just think that's absolutely phenomenal. And whatever message they have provided to their faculty to show the value of this, we need to duplicate across the system. And this is just so important for students and has made transferability so much better in the last decade. And thank you for the work that's going forward on this.
So there are a few people who deserve special recognition. One is Rachel Anderson from MSU, who has been a rock star tackling this project right at the front. Another is Matt Redinger from MSU Billings, who's also very ahead of the curve. The good thing is there's similarly dedicated people on all of our campuses who have a plan on how they're going to tackle this on their campus.
Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great work, Joe and Dr. Lindsay, for quarterbacking this for us. The question is probably more geared towards some of the smaller campuses. As a chair of the 2-year and community college committee, I'd like to know, are your voices from Helena, Great Falls, and the 3 community colleges being sufficiently heard from you and your chief academic officers in this process here? Because with transferability at the core of your missions, how good is this? How good are we? What do we need to do to make sure that, because you're the ones that have the students that are the benefactors of the work that's being done here. So could you give us a report on that? And then as this follow-up, Madam Chair, I'd like to know, are the tribal colleges and the 3 private colleges here in the state dialed into this at any level to understand what we're about here as well? So thank you.
Who would like to field that?
I'm getting a nod from Dean Wolf. I don't know if there's anyone else who would like to speak.
I didn't mean to say that I needed to speak, but I do know that Dr. Pasick has been involved in this work, and we certainly appreciate it, and I'm hoping my colleagues are feeling that, as well as the MUS two-year institutions. I don't know about the community colleges, if we have one of our colleagues or from the tribals that want to speak to that, but from our aspect, we feel like we've been involved.
I'm getting a thumbs up from Dr. Karras. So how about the tribals and and I would think Dr. Seck may have a vested interest in this going forward here too. So thank you, ma'am.
Hi, Corey Sanger-Billy, Stonechild College. And I can't speak for all of the other tribal colleges, but I know at Stonechild College we do work and we do follow the Common Course numbering for our students. And we will continue to do that.
Thank you. Regent Tuss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you for this. This is a really big deal, and we've been focusing on this for a very long period of time, and I want you to keep your foot on the gas on this. Regent Albrecht had talked about how she's heard from students on this. I can tell you in my 7 years of serving on the Board of Regents, this is probably the #1 concern that I have heard, not from students, but from families, from parents. You know, credits aren't transferring from one of our units to the other, and they just don't understand why that's not happening. So I just want to thank you and continue the good work on this.
Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy. Yeah, I just want to echo some of the comments of gratitude for taking this on. We were at a community meeting this morning, and it was what was deemed a love fest of just talking about all the positives here at Northern. And I think sometimes we slip in our meetings into all the positive things that happen in the system, and rarely from the bottom bring up significant problems like this or issues like this. So thank you for being bold and bringing it to us. It dovetails really well with the conversation we had in Dillon as a committee around the understanding program inventory as a system, a true efforts around the one MUS as it relates to programming, to academic maps, to transferability, to Common Course numbering. And so I see this as a pivotal piece of the puzzle for us to get to that place where I think we intended to be when we created the structure of the university system 24 years ago. And so I would say kudos to Joe and Dr. Lindsay and some of the others that you mentioned. I know it's going to be a lot of work, and a lot of work at the campus level, but I would just continue to keep in mind our students, as Regent Tuss mentioned, the families, the parents that have sort of struggled with this for a long time, and the conversation that we often have around college affordability is one of our primary priorities of the Board of Regents. There's nothing worse than taking a course, paying for it, passing, and then trying to transfer it and have that not count towards your degree. So kudos to everyone for bringing this, and Dr. Seck for bringing this to our attention on your way out and putting a really hard, tight deadline, even though you're not going to be a part of it. It's really smart. I would have done that too. And one last thing in terms of working with the tribal colleges, I know the tribal colleges were invited into this conversation when CCN started several years ago, and some of the tribal colleges jumped on board, some didn't. I don't know the exact status of as President Sangri-Billy mentioned, all of the tribal colleges working through CCN, but I would highly encourage that you reach out to each of the tribal colleges, because we have so many transfers from the tribal colleges into the university system. So I would make sure that we sort of underscore the importance of keeping them involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Lozar. Any other comments? Oh, go ahead.
Chair, Regents,
I'm Mark Seifert. I'm the Vice President of the Academic Senate here at MSU Northern. And I want to give you a little different perspective than you've heard about faculty and common course numbering. 5 years ago, I'm the person that decides whether or not a class is transferable for communication. So when somebody comes in and says, here's a class, is this transferable? 5 years ago, I did 40 to 60 sets of transfer paperwork a semester for students that came in. With common course numbering, I now maybe have to do 5. I think common course numbering is fantastic and want to see more of it, right? Because it reduces my paperwork enormously. And it certainly makes it easier to talk to colleagues across the entire system when we're talking about courses. So I just wanted to balance some of the faculty who are kicking and screaming with the faculty that are going, yeah, more please. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Greenfield.
Thank you, and I did not mean to insinuate that all faculty are opposed to common course numbering as a clarifier, but I'm so super heartened to hear that, and I hope that we can continue to share that kind of dialogue with the folks who might not yet have bought into common course numbering. I think it's important on both ends of the spectrum, and while it might create some headaches in the short term, I think it, in the long run, is much better for everyone, so thank you.
President Cruzado.
Yes. Public trust. That's one of the main topics that we need to remind ourselves as public institutions of higher education. And sometimes when we go to the legislature or when we read articles in the paper that are dismissive about the importance of public higher education, this is one of the best tools that we have at hand. The public does not understand the intricacies of our system. And sometimes we have run the risk of falling in love with these internal structures and strictures. And if we just make this conversation transparent, I'm sure that we will have the support of faculty and students and the public, and we will not fall in this perverse act where we tell the student, yes, this course transfers, but it doesn't count towards graduation. So this is one of the best mechanisms that we can have at hand to galvanize public trust in the Montana University system.
President Bodnar.
I completely agree with President Cruzado, and I think the important point, I emphasize the point, we've emphasized the point of accessibility and social mobility, for when there aren't clear pathways, the people and the students who suffer most from having courses that don't count, from having lack of clarity, are those with the fewest resources. And so this is an equity issue. This is an opportunity. This is an access issue, as well as a streamlining and simplification issue.
Thank you. This was a great presentation and very timely. Thank you for setting such tough deadlines. If Deputy Commissioner Seck doesn't come after you for this, perhaps my sister Mary Mo will, because she grappled with this for many years as well. So thank you so much for your work and the presentation, and we look forward for your next update. Next item is the sophomore surge. Deputy Commissioner Seck.
I was just thinking about both Mary Mo and myself going after them. So obviously, student success, retention, and completion has been a major focus of this board and this system for a number of years. And last fall, when the commissioner asked me to visit the various campuses around the system to learn more about recruitment and retention, Provost Makwa introduced to me the sophomore surge concept, and it's really captured my interest. So I thought in the spirit of sharing, this would be a great opportunity. So who is going to begin? Chris?
Good morning, Deputy Commissioner Seck, Chair Sheehy, Commissioner Christian, and members of the board. My name is Chris Kearns. I'm the Vice President for Student Success at MSU Bozeman, and I'm here today with my colleague and my friend, Dr. David Sengel, who's our Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, to talk about one of our initiatives to take student success to scale. As the slide before you suggests, we believe that getting the right support to the right student at the right time requires the commitment of the entire campus, which is why academic affairs and student success direct this program together, and that supporting students in this way is a little more complicated than it might first appear. We call our latest initiative to improve student success outcomes the Sophomore Surge. The idea behind the Surge is to pair more senior peer mentors with first-year students who can meet the incoming student undergraduates where they are, help them identify their path forward, and ensure that the university does everything it can to help them on their way into their sophomore year. This is one way to structure and to deliver wraparound support. I'll say more about the program in a moment, but I first want to illustrate its impact with just one of the a few less than 800 first-year student stories that have formed the first year of the Sophomore Surge. Although we measure it in the aggregate, student success happens one student at a time. So I want to tell you about a student named Paige, a first-year student from Montana. Early on in the Surge, Paige told us how excited she was to begin her college career. She was looking forward to her newfound freedom, to the absence of a curfew, and the chance to take charge of her schedule for the first time. But Paige also shared that she was nervous about the workload and the academic expectations that come with entering college. Fast forward 4 weeks. Now Paige is feeling overwhelmed. She isn't keeping up with the workload. She wants to start dropping courses, and she is even thinking about whether she should stay in school. If Paige had not been in the Sophomore Surge, whether or not she got support at this point would have been primarily up to her. Help was surely available, but she would have had to take the initiative herself to talk with a faculty member, to meet with an advisor, or to connect with one of our many student support resources. We don't think that's good enough for Montana. The Sophomore Surge is designed to give the institution a more active role in making sure that students get what they need, when and how they need it. This means that we want to meet students where they are in a way that's student-centered rather than being institutionally focused. As the slide indicates, Paige met with her peer mentor. They discussed time management, transition to college, well-being, and a number of other topics. With this support and with Paige's hard work, she stayed enrolled, she had a successful semester, and she has registered for fall. So how do we take Paige's, next slide please. So how do we take Paige's success to scale? Doing this requires us to move the needle of first to second year retention. Students facing Paige's challenges, meaning students who have everything that they need to succeed if only they can get connected to the right student support, are typically retained from the first to the second year at something like a 57% rate. Again, that's not good enough for Montana. Next slide, please. I don't even want you to look at this slide. I just wanted to give you an idea of where we started when we were trying to bring this problem into view. It's data like this that told us that even a relatively successful campus has a big challenge if we want to take student success to scale. In order to address this challenge, we assembled some of our best thinkers under the leadership of the Provost's Office, the Division of Student Success, and faculty who work and research in this area. But you not only need a team of teams for this kind of work, you need to find the right focus. So we also worked hard to identify that group of students most likely to benefit from the kind of student support that we wanted to design. From the outset, we assume that there is no silver bullet to hit the target of increasing first to second year retention. What we need instead is an arsenal of strategies. We decided the best way to get there was by linking peer mentoring to first year seminars and connecting 57 peer mentors to 780 first year undergraduates in those seminars. Partnering with peer mentors Sophomore surge students work on developmental activities such as transition to college, effective study habits, and academic decision-making. They also work on academic activities such as help with study skills, advice on how to read and use a syllabus, and support for educational pathway planning. Perhaps the most important feature of this effort is that the sophomore surge ensures that every undergraduate in the program has connected with someone who has asked them how they can help with their dreams, with their plans, and with their progress. So now to say a little bit more about the program and some of the initial indications about how it's going, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Singal.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you and good morning to the members of the board. After that overview, I'll dig a little deeper into our aims, the design of our program, the model that we're using implementing it, some lessons that we are learning as we look to continue and improve the program, and some preliminary results. Next slide, please. So our aims. We're framing this within the grand challenge of substantially increasing the fraction of adult population in the U.S. with higher education credential. Our aim is converting our pride in access to a pride in student success. So we want to realize an uptick in that first to second year retention, which is the crucial first step towards completion. That's where we lose students. And our aim is to do this by reallocating assets to make this work without incurring additional expense. So the model. What we want to do, in short, is with existing resources, change the world. Brian Stevenson, our convocation speaker this fall, gave that message to our incoming students, how you go about changing the world. You start with a grand challenge, something that's really worth working for. That brings hope that builds fortitude for everyone on the team. It requires thoughtful design that gives us confidence that the goals are realizable. And finally, and most importantly, it requires proximity in implementation. All the designs, all of the aspirations conceived of in the upstairs office will accomplish very little unless they are taken to students face to face. No student should ever leave without another person asking them directly, please stay. How can we help? Think of Paige. Everyone who leaves, we should feel pain of loss. So how do we do this? So I have a simple equation that made me think of Paul's crops. Proximate and parsimony and productivity, we go with peer mentoring. Now, I've added to this idea of proximate and parsimonious, I've added the word productive. And when we kicked off the surge, we learned that our mentors, we asked their motivation of the peer mentors who answered the call. And what we heard was that they were in, and it was personal. They were there to give support that they wished they had had in their trials and close calls. Many of the mentors had struggled and had just made it. And they were looking to be there, right there, for their peers. Next slide, please. The design was to engage students and mentors, as Chris mentioned, in the university seminar. That's a small class experience for entering students featuring discussions and texts, including the convocation read. To the academic component and building on existing strengths, we added work with peer mentors, extending learning outcomes to include personal development and the 7 C's, not the cod liver oil, but the 7 C's of curiosity, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, community, and citizenship. In educating the whole person and in looking forward to giving capacity that is not just a foundation for their education, but really is a foundation for every position that they will have throughout their careers. Okay, and we did this explicitly, by the way. Normally this is done as a mysterious side effect of what we're doing in the classroom, rather than that we are deliberately encourage students to reflect on this as we are going through this process. Okay. Digging a little deeper. In the first year, we identified a pilot cohort, enrolling about 780 students of that cohort in an optional 1-credit special topics course, each section of which was bundled with 1 section of the participating seminar. Now, I want to underscore,
We reach out to all students, but we reach scale of all students not by doing more and more and more of the same, but through a process of adaptive differentiation. So we start with the tables of numbers that Chris asked you not to look at, the descriptive analytics. We use these data to gain better insight into the critical factors for student success. This kind of predictive analytics enabled our selection of a cohort for which we anticipated that the surge model would visibly move the retention needle. Topping off a full tank doesn't do that. And this particular intervention would not suffice if we were running on fumes. So ultimately, we are looking forward to taking predictive analytics to prescriptive, in which every student is a cohort of one, and the interventions are individually designed. The first year of the program, next slide please, taught us a number of lessons. People like to talk about lessons learned. I prefer to phrase that as just continuing our lifelong learning that are being incorporated to improve programming in the next year. The most important is to move beyond linking the optional one-credit course with seminar, and to fully integrate the academic, foundational, and personal outcomes as integral outcomes in all of our seminars. This design is being incorporated in our campus first-year high-quality, high-impact practices in the NASH program that we spoke about in Dillon. So how are we doing? Next slide. So what we are experiencing is an interminable drum roll as we await the real first fall-to-fall retention data that will be available in fall census. So we're sitting on pins and needles, and we're going to be sitting on pins and needles for the whole summer. It's going to be a great summer. But we have some preliminary indicators that make us enthusiastic. First, to make a go, no-go decision some months ago for continuing the program, we compared fall to spring retention of students who were invited as part of the cohorts, but ultimately either opted in or out of the program. And we saw a 5 percentage point increase in fall to spring retention for the students who were invited and took the program over those who opted out. That's good. As we make projections the fall, I want to be cautious. We need to be especially careful. The programs aim to change behavior, so we're mindful that projections made on comparison to past behavior could have some surprises. But as we look out to that fall horizon, the landscape we see is this. Last year, the fraction of students who registered in May was roughly equal to those who actually came back in the fall. Any melt that occurred over the summer was balanced by others who registered after May. So, looking at last year's fall-to-fall retention, students with the same characteristics of this year's cohort, as Chris already mentioned, were retained at a smidgen below 57 or 60%. Chris mentioned 57%. This year's surge group is already registered for fall just a little bit below 70%. That's very good. Now, next slide. Let's go back to page. This book that we're writing on student success has many pages. Her story reinforces the model and the design, the power of proximity, and the importance of some of the foundational skills and personal development that the SURGE program emphasizes. When we get to a book of 150 pages, that's what gets us to our strategic retention goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the board? Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great work, Chris and David. This is impressive. We all remember from our college days the role that a faculty advisor would have on us. Some were perhaps better than others. How are you engaging your faculty advisors to be a part of this, solution, and not just having, a small group that are ultimately involved with that? But
so thank you for the question, and I want to pause for a moment to reflect before I give you a much too long answer. So we have a group called CAT, the Campus Advising Action Team, and it's mostly faculty and professional advisors, a mix. and students, and we are working to develop in each department and a departmental advising plan that recognizes the different roles played by various people, whether they're professional advisors, whether they're orientation leaders, and the specific role of faculty advisors. An emphasis in this program is to increase student-faculty contact. That role modeling is essential part of their development. So we don't want to do anything that excludes faculty. And I will go too long. But it's one of the things that I notice at conferences. You know, in these student success programs, I see two different kinds of universities. There are universities where the people say, well, how do you get the faculty involved? And there are universities who say, how could you imagine having a student success program that does not feature faculty who see the students day after day after day? And I think we're in that latter category moving forward.
Any other comments or questions, being sensitive to our time constraints? Thank you so much. This was excellent, and I think it'll provide a lot of food for thought on the other campuses. Thanks. Our next item is Great Falls College, MSU, 8-week block schedule.
And Madam Chair, we have a lot of ground to make up in a short amount of time, so I'll just remind everyone I have the infamous yellow and red folders back.
Is this on? Yeah. Who just? There we go. Okay. So there, I just used up all of our time. Thank you. John, put those down. Thank you and good morning. I'm pleased to have a campus team with me here today to introduce you to our new initiative, the 8-Week Advantage. But before introducing them, I want to say how proud I am of our college and our focus on student success. And we have been involved in a lot of high-impact practice research and work to determine a schedule that will best support our students. And we've worked with Dr. George Koo, Dr. John Gardner, Complete College America, and Montana, and President Cruzado also took some of us to Gutman Community College in New York City. To that end, as our executive team and our managers have been looking at our students, we came up with an overall campus goal statement of every student has a purpose, plan, and path to on-time completion. We have been finding that the 16-week semester often is a lifetime to our students. Life happens and they have to leave, and when they leave, in the middle of a semester, they leave with debt but no credit. So we also have been looking at learning communities. We already know that the cohort structure in nursing and health science programs work well because of the peer support that we have. So you'll hear a little bit today about those learning communities. Also creating a dependable schedule so that our working students and those with families or with military obligations know when they can schedule classes. So I'm just excited to have this group share with you. We have Troy Stoddard, who is our Director of Advising. We have Tom Oakberg, Math faculty, Mandy Wright, English faculty, and I'm going to let Troy start off, so thank you.
Okay, so the 8-Week Advantage is largely a result of a pilot we did in the 16-17 academic year, where we took a cohort of students and basically gave them a schedule and cut the semester in half and had them do half their classes in the first part of the semester in the first 8 weeks and their other half in the second 8 weeks. This was driven by some national research and trends showing the success that this model brings. Next slide. You can see in a traditional 8-week or 16-week semester, a student who's attending full-time, taking 15 credits, 5 classes, you have extreme peaks and valleys in their workloads, where at midterms, for example, they have 5 different assignments due, 5 different exams, and it's very stressful for students. But you also have points in the semester where they have very little that they're working on at a time. In an 8-week model, you don't get those low points, but you also don't reach those high extremes either because you're managing fewer classes at a time. The 8-week scheduling allows students to be greaterly immersed in their courses, They're able to focus more on those courses. They're meeting more regularly. It also allows them to complete prereq requirements more quickly. For example, at our college, where we have a lot of associative applied science degrees in our competitive programs, they have a variety of prerequisite courses that a student has to complete before they can get into those classes. And often that sequence of classes can slow down the student's ability to enter those programs. I use the example of nursing, where there's a sequence of 3 biology classes that they have to complete. And so that's a minimum of 3 semesters before they can even start the nursing program. Where under a model like this, they can have all those prereqs complete in a year. It's also greatly improves their ability to recover credits. If something happens in the students' lives and they do have to withdrawing from half their classes in 1 8 weeks, they can make up those credits or start to make up those credits in that next 8-week semester. So rather than losing an entire semester's worth of credits, they are earning some credit. And that was one of the greatest advantages we saw when we shifted to the 8 weeks. It also helps students manage, they're able to manage more credits as a result of this as well, where taking 3 classes at once might be difficult for a part-time working student, but even from a scheduling standpoint, taking 2 classes each 8-week block, that part-time student now has become a full-time student. So it's much more manageable. If we can go to the next slide. This shows what we're doing. We're still operating under the semester system. This was really important for financial aid reasons. So we're really just students doing half their classes in the first week and half in the second 8 weeks. Starting in fall 19, there will be a 1-week break in between our 8-week blocks, kind of like what we do in the spring semester with the spring break. That serves 2 purposes. One thing we found in running the pilot is the students, when they moved from their first 8 weeks to the second 8 weeks, experienced some burnout. So that gives them a chance to make that transition to their new courses as they start. It also helps from a staffing standpoint to help students make adjustments as needed. If they didn't do as well as they needed to do that first semester, that gives us that week to change schedules, make different plans, whatever we may need to do. So it's serving those 2 purposes there. And then the next slide. This is a sample schedule based on our current classes of what it might look like for a student. So you can see that they're taking 16 credits, 7 one, and then in the first 8 weeks, 9 in the other. And we've also built into this what we call mini cohorts. The initial pilot, we gave students a full-time schedule, pre-made full-time schedule. We discovered that that didn't work very well with our students because there was too much variability in what the students need. Being a small school, we didn't have enough offerings to accommodate every student need. Student math options, for example, was a big part of that, but also just in general their transfer needs. So what we've done instead is made these mini cohorts, these mini clusters. So in this instance, a student who's taking the MS Office class in the first 8 weeks, they are also taking the Becoming a Successful Student class in that first 8 weeks. And then the second 8 weeks, they're all in the interpersonal communications class together. So this creates kind of that mini cohort as well. And so we're incorporating that into these 8 weeks. And it's much easier to make these mini cohorts match the students' needs than an entire full-time load. The next slide. This shows kind of our outreach we've done to communicate this to students and the community on what we're attempting. And then the next slide, I'll let our faculty representatives here speak on the faculty experience as we move to this 8-week model.
From the math perspective, I think that the main thing is just that this will allow us to, no matter where a student comes into our institution at, they'll be able to complete their first college-level math course in their first year, in either their first or second semester. So that's obviously a huge hurdle that students have to go over that they'll be able to do more quickly than under the previous model. And part of that is reworking some accelerated models we already have implemented. And part of that will just be the 16-week courses being condensed into 8. So that's definitely a huge thing for our students to be able to get over that obstacle within their first year of study.
So for English, we have not quite as much of a pathway as math classes do, but we also discovered that students were successful in completing, if they required any kind of remediation, we discovered that they were successful completing both their developmental and their college level writing courses in the same semester. And in fact, we're working towards creating a co-requisite model where they'll be able to complete all of their writing requirements in one 8-week block. So we'll be implementing that this fall. And I have a lot of confidence that that's going to work out. I think as far as embedded tutoring goes, we experienced embedded tutoring in writing and also in math, I think, correct? And that provided a really great connection for the students to be able to connect with tutors rather than being faced with the task of visiting the tutoring center on their own, which can be a barrier for some students. And it also provided some additional support during class time, which was very helpful to the students and to instructors. I guess I can speak to the challenges a little bit. As far as challenges go, there are some challenges that we anticipate and have experienced. Tom and I were both part of that original pilot, so we have already conquered some of these challenges in our departments, but co-requisite courses will continue to need to be redesigned for certain areas, and the developmental math sequence will continue to need some work just because of the sequencing that students require. The student burnout that we mentioned is also a faculty burnout issue sometimes. So the week-long break between the blocks, I think, will be very helpful, because in the pilot and what we'll also experience this fall is that the turnaround time is a weekend between the blocks, which is difficult to help students transition, and it's also difficult to complete all of the grading that needs to be completed and processed during that time. So we know that that's going to be a challenge initially, but it's something that will be resolved as we move forward. And I think overall, we have a bullet point talking about reading intensive courses needing to be redesigned. But really, I think that a challenge that some faculty members have expressed concerns about is, how do I condense the content of my course into 8 weeks? And for many of us who have taught in the summer, that's the standard model already, so we're already familiar with that. But we're working with our instructional designer, our faculty development center, to offer training to faculty and support to really encourage folks to go back to the learning outcomes and to use the learning outcomes as the basis for the course rather than making it so content-driven. So ensuring that we are meeting the outcomes and using appropriate teaching and assessment methodologies that relate directly to the outcomes rather than saying, well, this is what we've always done, so let's condense it, I think is going to require a paradigm shift in some ways, but for most of us, I think that's going to be ultimately a successful change.
If we can go to the next slide. The students have been largely positive with this. The biggest concern initially has just been a misunderstanding. Many students assumed that this meant they were going to go full-time the first 8 weeks and full-time the second 8 weeks, and so they'd be taking like 30 credits in a 16-week time period. Once we resolve that issue, they really like this. Most of them see the advantages to it before you even explain the advantages because they've experienced it in their own lives. They've seen those times where they lost their child care for several weeks or had a sick kid and missed several weeks of school and ended up failing multiple classes as a result. So they immediately see the benefits. The biggest concern we have is a little bit of just the unknown. Some are concerned about the accelerated nature of the classes, particularly in those classes that haven't been taught in this 8-week model before, particularly in our healthcare programs with the clinicals and as well as some of our science classes with the labs. And that's where some of the biggest concerns are. There is, even from the faculty side, some question on whether we'll be able to move the clinical classes into an 8-week model. So they may stay at the traditional 16 weeks, largely because the hospital can only accommodate so many students in so many times, and they have to get those hours in, and they may not be able to do that in an 8-week model. But other than the clinicals, we are looking at, by fall 19, transitioning everything into 8-week courses. This fall, most of the general education classes are transitioning. So this next year is kind of a transition period for us. And then any questions?
Thank you. Before I ask for questions, I'm asking one of you, Deputy Commissioner Seck. This is an informational item. Will this ever come to us in any other way, or is this, how does this go from this part of the process?
Madam Chair, members of the board, no, this is at the prerogative of the campuses. But I will add, this is one of the initiatives of Complete College America, and so I'm really excited that Great Falls College MSU is doing this, and I think it's going to be great to watch how it unfolds. And I just extend many compliments to you for your planning and hard work behind this.
Thank you. Regent Greenfield.
Thank you. I would echo Deputy Commissioner Seck's congratulations and for the hard work that you've put into this. My question is based on that initial fear that you said students raised of, oh my gosh, am I going to be completing 30 credits in my one 16-week semester? Is that possible? Can students actually do that if they so chose? So I can think
Sure, technically, but it's no different than right now than a student who completes 20 credits in a 16-week semester. There are exceptions where they can do it, but they are just that. They're exceptions. They're rare. It's not something you would normally advise a student to do.
Right, absolutely. I was just curious to know if under this model there would be certain limitations or anything placed on students.
No limitations that don't already exist.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you so much for your work on this. We look forward to seeing how it turns out. And it turns out it was more difficult than just cutting everything in half. And it looks like you've developed a lot of methods of doing this that are going to work out well. So good luck, and we look forward to hearing back. Next on our agenda is the academic program follow-up process.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Teal has been working with the chief academic officers on this process, and they're making great progress, and so I think they're here today to provide a very short update.
Chair Sheehy, Commissioner, members of the board.
Joe, can you pull that a little closer?
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I can get a little closer. Seeing my boss over there with the colored paper, we're going to try and make this a brief update, knowing that we've talked with the committee at some depth about this process. I've brought along, I'm going to just run through very quickly what the chief academic officers working with me, working with the deputy commissioner have come up with. And then I'm going to turn it over to Provost Makwa and Dr. Pasek to talk about the advantages that we see this bringing both for the provost job of managing the suite of programs at their campus and also for the system. So on your screen you can see 3 hypothetical new programs. These are programs faculty come up with, the campus proposes, and under our current process, we gather a lot of information. There's a good deal of paperwork and thought that goes into not only forecasting 5 years out enrollment, revenues, expenditures for these programs, what we're hoping the demand is, but also discussions about what's the curriculum, how have you determined the need for this program, the level 2 proposals that you're familiar with. In our current process, that's the end. Programs are reviewed on a regular 7-year basis, but there's no follow-up to see have programs achieved what they set out to achieve with respect to these measures that we asked them to forecast. And perhaps more importantly, for programs that fall behind, we don't have a route to bring to the board some information as to what they plan to do about that. If we're falling well behind our enrollment, how are we going to change the program to increase enrollment? How are we going to cut costs? Or how are we going to terminate the program and move those resources somewhere else? And that's what the provost working with me have been trying to work on. We faced 2 issues. First of all, we've already heard from a faculty representative that there's some paperwork fatigue, and we didn't want this process to create paperwork fatigue. We wanted it to create a useful stumbling block for the programs that really needed it. And to do that, we thought, can we build in a trigger? Can we find something that we can measure at the system level that captures something important about these programs, that we can develop a threshold for the programs that really could use some follow-up? So our plan is that for programs that are approved under the level 2 process, in year 2 and in year 4 of operation, the Commissioner's Office is going to go out into our student data warehouse. We're going to find the actual annual unduplicated headcount enrollment of students who have a major or a minor in that program, and we're going to compare that against what campuses projected in their level 2 forms. And then we're going to take a ratio. We're going to see how close did you get to what you projected. And we're going to use that to determine which programs we want to follow up on. And working with the CAOs, working with the CFOs around the system, we set an initial threshold of 70%. So the thought is, if you're only enrolling 70% of the students you thought you were going to, then that's probably an indicator that in the resources you're putting towards the program or the process of attracting students, the revenues that program attracts, that some discussions need to happen. So for programs that fall below that 70% threshold, there will be a simple 3-question form they'll be asked to fill out. That form will ask them to say, why do you fall behind your projections? What do you ascribe this to? What steps are you taking to adjust? And then can you give us some revised forecasts to see where you think you're going to go from here, both of headcount, of revenues, of expenditures. With that, I'll turn it over to the panel to provide some of their thoughts on the process and how they think this is going to affect academic planning.
Thank you, Joe, Chair Sheehy, and Regents. Mr. Teal asked me to provide just some brief comments on establishing the context for these changes and some of the background behind them. This is really part of an overall restructuring of the board academic approval process. And I could break that into 3 components. The first component involves the process itself, which is led by 3 milestone submittals that campuses provide. It starts with the academic program planning list, the intent to plan form, and finally the level 1 or level 2 forms. The second component of the restructuring involves some significant revisions to these curriculum proposal forms. The forms are now leaner, they're more concise, and they require more specificity from the campuses to provide consistent information for the Regents for you all to review. Then the third component involves a new requirement for fiscal information. And so the new revised forms provide a budget template that requires faculty and program directors to come up with estimates of revenue versus expenses. And the revenues are enrollment driven. we are not requiring that every proposed program be a profit center, to be a standalone moneymaker. We recognize that at the end of the day, certainly the aggregate of our academic program offerings have to balance. We have to be good stewards of our resources. However, we also recognize that the campuses have some programs that are more expensive than average to meet student needs, workforce requirements, or to just for the better good of the state. We went through a process of a small working group, including Provost Pasick and Provost Abbott, myself, working with John Seck and Joe, in looking at various options and working with the CAO groups. We felt that this process would provide faculty and program leaders incentive to have conservative and as accurate as possible estimates of revenues and expenses. And the process of having to report and assess makes good sense. That's what we do in academics. So in conclusion, the existing of a post-approval audit at the system level reinforces the importance of developing accurate projections of enrollment-driven revenues on one hand in comparison to anticipated expenses on the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Makwa. Members of the board, thank you for hearing our update this morning. My job is to tell you a little bit about our hopes for the future in regard to this process. In the spirit of not creating tons of new forms to fill out and read and think through, our hope as we move through this process, I think Commissioner Christian said yesterday that we're moving from access, really focusing on access, to really focusing on our efforts towards student success. And hearing all of this great stuff this morning about how we're bringing so many high-impact practices to scale, this process we sort of see as a foundation in helping campuses to return back to their campuses to look at those pieces of data, like their dashboard data, more frequently, to see what kinds of things are working and what kinds of things are not working, so that we are leveraging those data in conjunction with things like internal program review, so that we don't have to go back and do program prioritization again. We want to make sure we stay on top of things, that we understand what kinds of interventions work for our students and what kinds of things do not. And we have been provided with some wonderful resources. Just in the past few weeks, we've been able to meet with kind of the rock stars of student learning outcomes assessment, and how to really drill in and look at these practices and get great data on what's working when you hear about all of these great initiatives. So that's sort of our hope for the future in a nutshell, is this will keep us all focused on a regular basis, and that information will come back to you regularly so you can hear how we're doing, and we don't have to wait 7 years for that internal program review report to come our way.
So with that, we're open for questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the Regents? Before we go to questions, I want to thank you for everything you've done, and I also want to point out that Casey, Regent Lozar, really pushed this, and without your leadership, it wouldn't have gotten started. And then over the course of the last year, Regent Greenfield has just been very actively working hard on this, and your diligence, these two regents in particular, deserves to be noticed. Any questions for the panel? Regent Greenfield.
Thank you. And thank you again to the panel and everyone else in the room and outside the room who have put a lot of work and effort into this. I'm supportive of this. I think this is a good first step in the right direction of some of the conversations that Regent Lozar and I have been envisioning for the future. I think we had a good conversation after our ARSA call and a brief conference about this to make sure we were clear on the item. And I expressed some follow-ups of some ideas I think that would orient this more towards what I think would benefit the board. frankly, I don't think that the board ever has an opportunity to say no to academic programs when they come up to them. Besides Regent Tessa's vote in Western, in the last decade, we have not had a non-unanimous approval of an academic item that has come to the board in a level 2 proposal. The last time was 2009, and even that program passed. So even when there is dissent, which is very rare, once a decade it appears, we're going to pass it through. And frankly, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think we have a good way, we don't have a crystal ball up here that tells us that this program is not right for Montana or the needs of our students or our state. I think where we can follow up more is this review process. And that's, I think, the solution, that side that we need to focus on. And I think that the board really needs to focus on. I'm supportive of this effort, but I think it's going to continue some of the problems of our current system in the sense that the Board of Regents is not going to have an opportunity at any point with this review to say no either. I think the arbitrary 70% threshold is problematic in the sense that it's not going to be following up on what the board's expectations of programs are. What I would prefer to see instead is for 2-year campuses, 4-year campuses, and then graduate programs, breaking out different metrics that we need to see for each program, and then assessing those with certain benchmarks that we have at the board level. So we'll set an enrollment mandate for 2-year programs, and any 2-year program has to enroll this many students, graduate this many students by the end of this 4-year period, and when we're reviewing it. And if not, they're automatically up for review instead of just having this 70% threshold mark. I think that would give the board some more teeth and reason to review something, say very clearly didn't meet the benchmark that we have set or the mandate we have set for enrollment and other important metrics that we have set and are looking for our programs. I really think that the board needs to take a bigger stand on this in the future and really take control of the academic programs we're approving. In some sense, I want to leave the proposal, the generation, and the fit to the campuses, but I think that the board needs to set a stronger stance on how it's going to evaluate these programs, whether they think they're the right fit for this state, whether they could be implemented better in the system somewhere else at a different institution. And I don't think this new proposal is going to get us towards that goal. I think it's a step in the right direction, but that's my hope for the future. In my last meeting here, I want to articulate that to the chief academic officers, the faculty, the students, and most especially my fellow board members who are going to be continuing on. As we see some declines in enrollment and other challenges that we're going to be facing, I think we really need to focus on what it is we are expecting from our academic programs that we're approving. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is through a follow-up process like this. So thanks for the first step, and I look forward to seeing what comes of this.
Commissioner Christian.
I won't belabor this too long, but I would just say much of the review work on this approval process that's happened over the last few years started with conversations several years back, and I agree with some of the comments. What I think is that we're looking at many of these in the wrong place. I think the level 2 approvals that come after several years of work by the campus isn't probably the appropriate level to get the right amount of buy-in that sort of creates the scenario that we've often lived with. And so, well, I mean, this review process is one more cog. I think the intent to plan was a very good process. Ultimately, I think we need a few more conversations about the level 2 approval and even, frankly, the necessity of it, which is a conversation we started 5 years ago. I think the place for the board to weigh in on programs eventually, and all things need their due time, but is at the intent to plan state, which is that opportunity to say, is this the right fit for the state? Is this the right fit for the institution? And then maybe come back with this review process, which would give the board a louder voice in the front end, and then following up to see if those programs ultimately meet our expectations. But much more to come on this. This is, of course, an information item, and we'll continue to take input, feedback, and move these proposals along.
Regent Lozar?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think in some ways, I agree with the Commissioner in the sense that either we're looking at level twos or we're focusing more attention on intent to plan. I still think it's going to be in a vacuum, generally speaking. I think that the system needs to get better at looking at our program inventory across the board. What does, I kind of go back to the Missoula College study that was done a couple years ago, and how they met with industry, identified some of their core things there where they were deficient in terms of programming, and some areas where there were some programs that people really wanted to take advantage of that aligned well with industry. Not that everything has to align with industry, but I would love to have us get to the point where, yes, we're looking at the intent to plans, and we can say, as board members, this is what we need because of X, Y, and Z. Right now, I think, and I disagree with Regent Greenfield in the sense that we do have the opportunity to say no in our level 2 program approvals. I think we trust the process, the existing process where all of these are coming up from faculty, from professors, and going through the process and being vetted across the board. We can say no to that. I think we have said no, other than Paul really messing up this record we had. We do say yes, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I'd like to see us have our campuses taking risk on brand new programs, and that was kind of maybe if I had any issue with the particularities of the new program follow-up here is the 70%, that trigger that Joe talked about, somewhat arbitrary. I would love to have people who are presenting new programs to hit 100% of their projections. That just makes sense. But Joe convinced me that if we're going to be innovative, we're not going to have all the answers, and we don't want those that are putting out these new programs to be sort of hands tied or stymied at the perfect projection. I don't think academia is perfect. And so I'm comfortable with that 70% threshold. But I would just remind everyone that this is iterative. I mean, we're going to look at this, if we take action in future meetings, we're going to look at this and say, we'll have the data to say the average was 80%. Maybe that we start moving that trigger up to 80% or whatnot. And I think the campuses and the CAOs are going to do a much better job in this system of getting better at projections and understanding industry and those types of things. So I see this new program follow-up as just one small piece of the puzzle that goes along with how we look at program inventory, this idea of 1 MUS, the conversation about Common Course numbering that we had today, and I'd like us to get to that point too, is that we're looking at Common Course numbering and its relationship to new program proposals, and ensuring that that we're dealing with Common Course numbering at that level, at that point in the process, so that we at least can ensure that learning outcomes are going to be updated and courses are going to be updated if they fit in the CCN. So I wanted to just thank all of the folks who worked on this. We had this conversation kicked off in November at the November meeting, and it was just, what is the review process? And today, 3 meetings later, we've got a pretty darn solid plan to move forward that has the backing of the faculty. So kudos to you, John, for ensuring that we're keeping the eyes on the prize on this. And thank you, Regent Greenfield, for your work on this.
Any other questions regarding this item? We'll move on to item E of the information items, Level 1 memorandum.
Madam Chair, members of the board, the Level 1 items, as you know, are items where the board has delegated authority to either the campuses or the commissioner's office, and these have been thoroughly vetted by the campuses and no questions exist.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Can you tape that so that we can just play it at every meeting from here on out? Any questions about Level 1? Let's move on to level F, intent to plan proposals. Deputy Commissioner Christian.
Madam
Deputy.
Madam
Sec.
Chair, members of the board, these are the intent to plan proposals for the campuses for February, March, and April. And very similarly, they have been thoroughly discussed and vetted by the campuses and discussed at the ARSA Committee.
And these are for information so that we have full notice to everyone in the system. Do we have any questions on the intent to plan proposals? Hearing none, that brings us to the end of this committee's business. Before adjourning, however, what? No? Oh, okay. That does bring us to the end of our business, but before we adjourn this committee, I want to thank Deputy Commissioner Seck. I think this is probably your last duty as Deputy Commissioner, and I want to be the first to say, President Seck, that we look forward to working with you at Carroll College.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I would like to offer my colleagues 5 minutes, a 5-minute break, and we will reconvene at 10:45. Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to reconvene our meeting. And as we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we have President of Stone Child College, interim president, I believe, Corey Sangri-Billy with us today. And I would just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge President Corey Sangri-Billy of Stone Child College. I'm not sure where she is, but this is really important that we acknowledge our representation of our tribal colleges, so we appreciate you being here. And then Regent Tess would like to make an acknowledgement as well.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that I saw in the back of the room, Representative Bachmeyer, Representative Jacob Bachmeyer is here, our nation's youngest legislator, a student at MSU Northern, and a stalwart supporter of the Montana University system. So Representative Bachmeyer, thank you for being here.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the student appeal. Everyone on the board should have received this. You have each received the commissioner's decision and the written appeal with supporting documents submitted by the student. The issue before the board in each of these is solely to determine whether to hear the appeal at a later meeting. Board of Regents policy does not require the board to entertain these appeals if we are satisfied with the commissioner's review and decision. This appeal is confidential, so we will not be addressing the student by name or even identifying the campus involved, nor will we address the facts or the specific issues today. The sole issue today is whether any regent believes the issues addressed in the commissioner's decision needs further review at the board level. If you do not wish to hear the appeal at the Board of Regents level, it is not necessary to make a motion. A lack of action on our part will signify our decision not to hear the case. Are there any general questions as to this procedure before we go to the appeal? Seeing none, for the student appeal, I will entertain a motion to hear this appeal. There being no motion to hear this appeal, the request that we entertain this appeal is denied, and the commissioner's decision is upheld. Thank you. The next, yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, the next item, I jumped ahead, I apologize. The next item are the committee reports and action. The two-year and college committee are only information items. So there are no action items there. So we will move to the Budget Administration and Finance Committee portion of the meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent items under general consent A through J, staff items A through D, emeriti faculty items A through H. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Tuss. Any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Campuses. Any public comment? Seeing no further, oh, pardon me. Please state your name.
Hi, my name is Taylor Blossom. I'm the new president of the student body at MSU. I just wanted to speak on the present law budget and the labor agreements.
Excuse me,
Oh.
that is an item that will come up later.
Sorry.
So you're welcome to come up on, during that item. Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Now, moving on to action item A, present law budget for the 2021 biennium. I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Lozar. Any discussion or corrections from members of the board? Regent Greenfield.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up with a comment on this, and it sounds like we'll get a little bit of public comment as well, but I just want to clarify that I understand what I'm approving here is a budget to go forward to the legislature. I just frankly have a different ideology for what this budget we should be sending forward should be, and that's why I'm going to be voting no. So I want to clarify that I'm in full understanding of what we're approving here. I just don't agree with it. So.
Any further discussion from members of the board or the campuses? Any public comment?
Now that we're talking about the right thing. My name is Taylor Blossom. I'm the new president of the student body at MSU. I just wanted to come touch on this specifically with regard to the labor agreements. I know those specifically are going to come up later. First of all, obviously we want to keep tuition low, and that's always something that, especially in student government, we're striving to do, keep the cost of attendance low. With that being said, I'm in full support of the proposed raises for faculty that were negotiated. I think supporting our faculty and showing that we value them is really important, and going into the legislative session, we should be advocating for them in any way we can. So I'm in full support of both of those items. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on this item? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor to signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Same sign. Motion passes. Action item B, long-range building program priority list, 2021 biennium. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Nystuen. Any discussion or from members of the board? Campuses? Any public comment on this item? Seeing no further comment, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item C, fee task force recommendations. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Greenfield. Okay. Any discussion or corrections from members of the board?
Madam Chair, do we need I'd like to have a second motion on this item. Yesterday we talked about approving the recommendations with a couple adjustments to the language that Regent Sheehy brought up in terms of the approval requirements, and then we also had a conversation about unstriking the portion that's applying to the law school. Madam Chair.
So we have a second motion?
I would suggest is a motion to amend.
Sorry, that would be a motion to amend the previous motion by Regent Greenfield.
Discussion. So I appreciate Regent Sheehy's amendments, and I'm friendly towards those. However, I do feel strongly even after discussion with Dean Kurgis of the law school that item B under the second attachment under section 4, student government activity fees related to the law school with the number 13 should remain struck. I know some students would like to speak in public comment about that as well. Frankly, my understanding of this was not changed based on my discussion with Dean Kurgis. The argument that the law student should be exempt from paying this student activity fee is simply that they pay a student bar association fee of $25 a semester. In my opinion, that is the extra fee that they're being charged, not the mandatory student government fee that every student in the Montana University system has to pay except these law students. They currently are paying an arbitrary amount of that fee based on a discussion that was had many decades ago between ASUM and the Student Bar Association. So right now, both sides are out of compliance. I think we need to rectify this, and the only way I think that we can do that is by striking this policy. Whatever the agreement is between the Student Bar Association and the Associated Students of the University of Montana needs to happen outside of Board of Regents policy. By keeping this policy in, we are effectively in contradiction with our definition of a mandatory fee. A mandatory fee is a fee that is assessed to all students regardless of their program of study. That includes law. I think adding this in is something that would be dangerous to that definition. It would infringe upon it, and frankly, the fee task force in its review voted to strike this line. I talked with Commissioner Christian about this issue, specifically this line of policy, at the beginning of my term in July. The recommendation I received then was, let's wait until the fee task force is convened to discuss it then. I waited, and here we are. I think this is the time to discuss it. At the end of the day, the Board of Regents is going to have to take a vote on this piece of policy at some point. There's an argument that the Student Bar Association should be here to say that they don't want this line to be struck. Of course they don't. ASUM is going to say the exact opposite, that they think it should be struck. I think the best way forward is to just strike this piece of policy, this exemption that contradicts other Board of Regents policy, and let the parties negotiate at the campus level about an arrangement that will work, whether that is a reduced fee price for law students, whether it's a reduced fee price for a certain duration, whether that's mandatory funding from the fee revenue that would be generated from that going towards law student programming, whatever it is, that needs to be decided between the parties at the campus level, but should not be a protection guaranteed by Board of Regents policy. I feel very strongly that we need to strike this, and I know that we'll have some supporters come up and say the same thing.
So I would, any further discussion?
I hear you, Chase. I understand what you're saying. I've also talked to Dean Kurgis, and I'm okay with this. And that may seem self-serving as a former law student, but I think they're paying about the same amount in the way that fees are structured. And I also think with respect to a matter of policy, when creating this with such great attention to detail, it is okay, by me anyway, to include an exception in the policy as long as it's straightforward and it's been noticed. So I'm okay with that. I think part of this is just the law school is kind of a special entity on campus, and it may arise from the fact that the 3 years of law school, I don't think they pay the activity fee because I don't remember ever doing anything active. Law school is basically 3 years of this meeting. So I think it arose just by the nature of the beast, and I'm okay with it. So I support the amendment.
Regent Lozar.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at this maybe less so on the amount of the fee and the purpose of the fee. I'm looking at this from, these fees have been in place for some of them up to 50 years, and this task force was charged with looking at the fees and figuring out ways that we can build categories and make it easier for us to understand what fees we have and how to be able to plan for them in the future. We know that student fees in particular are, if you look at certainly the May meetings, that's always a point of conversation and public comment for the students. So I understand it's an emotional item for the students, and certainly it hits their pocketbook. So I don't necessarily have an issue per se with the language whatsoever. From a board perspective and hearing the task force coming in front of us, I don't believe we talked about this specifically in the information item in March. It came to us as an action item with some reservations, and this one being the only one that came with reservations. And knowing that we've had these fees for 50 years, that my amendment to the motion is simply saying on this particular item, let's have a little additional dialogue. That's not going to make it sort of dangerous on us not following policy. I think that's good practice to say, hey, some folks have a couple issues with this particular item. Let's look at a conversation, and maybe that conversation is adding it specifically to an action item exclusively on its own in a future meeting. Have that dialogue with the board so we understand all the idiosyncrasies of both the history and its impact on students and the connection to the adjustments that we have before us today. So it's more on the let's have a little more dialogue. I understand there has been dialogue at the campus level, and that's great. But as members of the board, this is the first time I'm hearing about it, and so I'd prefer to play it rather safe and have the dialogue in front of us at a future board meeting, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Regent Lozar. Regent Greenfield?
Thank you. So I want to address a few things. One, Regent Sheehy's comments. So all mandatory fees, one of the exclusions on that is they're assessed to students whether or not they use the service. In this case of the law students, they do utilize ASUM services at an equal or a higher rate than non-law students based on a survey that was conducted in the last academic year. So that argument to me does not work. Additionally, I mean, you can make a similar argument if law students have their own building. Why should they pay the student union building fee? They're never going to use that. They don't need to even step foot in that building. But you pay for the option to use it. You pay for the service. Frankly, that argument to me is not very strong or compelling. While I personally believe that the law students should pay every dime of the ASUM fee, that should be a conversation that the campus has. I agree with you, Regent Lozar, that more of that can come up to the board level. But frankly, I think by not striking the policy, we're going to be giving the law students an unfair advantage over the student government in the sense that they can demand that we're not going to pay anything. We don't have to pay a single dime. The board policy exempts us entirely from this mandatory fee, and ASUM is going to have a hard time combating that if that's what we're codifying in our Board of Regents policy. I think by striking it, there's definitely much more room for further dialogue, including the possibility of coming up with more or clearer policy language that could come back up to the board level. But I think by not striking it, you're going to leave that opportunity open for law students to strong-arm the associated students. Frankly, this is a difference between 98% of students paying the full activity fee and 2% of students paying an arbitrary amount that's been designated based on a conversation had between executives decades ago. I think we need to strike this policy and let the campus come back to us with something else.
Further discussion on the amendment?
Madam
Regent
Chair, would
Nystuen.
you just circle back and what's the amendment? Do we have the language of the amendment for us to consider at this juncture?
Regent Lozar?
Madam Chair, well, there's a couple items in the amendment. The first is the language, a slight adjustment on, what is this? The second page of the policy that we have in front of us under approval requirements, taking out the word specific, and Deputy Commissioner Trevor's got the language, if that's not the exact word, that we discussed with from Regent Sheehy's recommendation yesterday. The second part of the amendment to the motion is on is right near number 13, where it says outdated on the same policy, where it's struck right now. The amendment is to remove the strike through to allow for additional dialogue in future meetings, Madam Chair.
Any further discussion on this amendment? Okay. So
Chair Albrecht,
yes,
briefly,
Regent Greenfield?
I know some students requested the opportunity to speak on this particular piece of the item as well, so if public comment is allowable, that would be beneficial.
And again, this is regarding the amendment. Is there any further discussion from members of the board? Campuses? Any public comment on this item? I see a few. Please come forward and state your name.
Madam Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Brenna Love. I am the president of the Montana Associated Students. Someone said in an email last night that last fall, ASUM and SBA agreed to not seek change in this policy after a meeting, and that both ASUM leadership and the SBA were surprised that this came forward. I just wanted to say that that was untrue. I was present in the meetings between ASUM and SBA last year. I'm also the former vice president of ASUM. Last spring, actually, we had this conversation with the SBA leadership, as happens annually. Basically, this conversation is had every single year between ASUM and SBA leadership because this is an outdated problem. The students should be contributing the full amount as ASUM believes and haven't been for a long time. And leadership has this conversation every year, and every year it's the exact same conversation. You've heard the arguments on both sides, so I won't reiterate those, but I did just want to say that those conversations were had, and ASUM told SBA, you know, we won't bring this forward last May, which was our original intentions last spring. We wanted to bring it to the May meeting last year, and we said, you know what, we'll wait, we'll keep having conversations, we'll answer more questions, but our intentions all along have been to go through the proper channels, bring this to the board, and have the conversation here. So this should not be a surprise to the SBA either. That being said, I appreciate Regent Lozar's comments about further dialogue, and I understand that there ought to be more and better communication, and I agree with that. Yet, like I said, we've had the exact same conversation several times, and I don't think that that's going to change. We've heard all of the arguments on either side, and it's time for this outdated policy to change, frankly. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Alex Butler. I'm the ASUM president. So I am not in favor of unstriking this item 13. I think it should be struck. The reason I think so is that currently law school students pay 60% of the total activity fee throughout the full year. This can be tricky to handle since when we allocate money to law school student groups, there's just kind of unwritten rule where do we fund them less because they pay less, how do we fund them? So in the past, it becomes difficult for us at ASUM to allocate money to law school student groups because they're paying less for the activity fee, so how do we balance that out with other students that are paying the full activity fee? And this becomes kind of an imbalance for other students that pay the full activity fee, but law school students can somewhat have a benefit to paying less into it, but also get money from ASUM. Also with that, to speak on the services that they receive, yeah, some students in the past feel like they don't use these services. However, this activity fee, though, gives them the ability and the opportunity to use these services. I think actually to go in the direction that they want to and not pay this activity fee at all could hurt students in the future because they don't have the ability to use the resources that we offer them. Also, we want to represent all students on campus, and this impinges our ability to represent all students on campus because they're no longer student activity or fee-paying students, and so it becomes difficult for us to represent all these students. Though I know in the past they felt like they have been left out, I cannot and will not speak to that, but I can say moving forward, no matter what happens, I will work harder to make sure that they are being represented, that we are reaching out to the SBA, and that they are being heard. They have the ability to serve on Senate as a senator. If in the future they don't pay this activity fee, they don't have the ability to serve on ASUM Senate. Likewise, if they don't pay this activity fee, they don't have the ability to be an ASUM student group and receive funding for us. That would completely go away. And so I think that would hurt law school students in the future. Even though maybe current and past law school students did not use those resources, it would impact future students. So my final thing I want to say on this is that in the future, no matter what happens, though I want this to be struck, I will continue to work with them and be in constant communication with them since this is a tricky issue. And I will work on implementing this process, and I will work harder to make sure that ASUM has a better representation with SBA, and so that you have my word that I will work better with them in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on this item? Okay.
Can I ask for a clarification? So a no vote on the amendment means that we will keep the language struck as it is and not add Regent Sheehy's recommendations. Can we perhaps divide that question, because I don't think anyone has a qualm with Regent Sheehy's suggestions at the top, but I do think that this item 13 might have contention.
You can divide it if you think it will materially affect the vote. I don't think it will.
If it won't materially affect the vote, we'll just keep it as is. So I would then entertain, let's see here, the call for the vote regarding this amendment. Is that clear?
Madam Chair, could we go over, just for clarity's sake, one more time precisely what the amendment is? I mean, I am a little confused about this.
Okay, yeah,
And
there's
I would like,
couple
I would
of,
like to see either on the
double negatives in
screen
here.
or.
Makes it
We have 4
confusing.
attachments here, and I just want to make sure what we're voting on.
Yes, so we're voting on the amendment, and the amendment, if Deputy Commissioner Trevor could state that and clarify.
There are 2 parts, so let's back up to the first section. Heather, if you could, please.
Madam Chair, the amended motion is to approve the fee task force recommendations, including the discussion in the committee hearing yesterday, which had 2 parts. One is the unstriking of the portion applying to the law school, and the second part being the verbiage changes provided by Regent Sheehy.
So, Madam Chair, that's area number 2 on this document, and I believe area number 13 on the policy document.
And what were the verbiage changes?
I can read those.
Tyler has them on a bar napkin, on which I wrote.
Of which I took a picture of. The first verbiage is directly related on page 2 to the statement of the approval requirements, and they basically remove the word contain to make it more specific, ironically, because then it focuses the word on specific. So it reads, approval requirements. The following mandatory fees require specific Board of Regents approval as set forth below. That would be the new language. Below that directly are the building fees, which we would then call the building and facility fee uses.
Can we perhaps just vote on that portion now, for clarity's sake? I
Yeah.
think that's very easy.
I can do that. Yeah, we can do that. Is that, so
You want me to
we
read
are-
that motion?
We are going to,
Yeah,
the
I can call
motion
division.
So
to amend,
we need Casey to restate his motion, if you would, just to amend what you see before you in item number 2, to reflect those language changes just read by Tyler.
Okay, so what I'd like to amend is the motion on the table right now with the language that Tyler just mentioned from Regent Sheehy.
any further discussion on this particular amendment from members of the board? Campuses? Any public comment on this amendment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote on this amendment. All in favor of this amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion for this amendment of the verbiage passes. Regent, Regent Lozar, would you like to clarify your second amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to,
Motion.
I would like to move an amendment to, I think, Regent Greenfield's motion that we unstrike the section near number 13, students enrolled in the law school, Madam Chair.
Since we are tweaking this somewhat, is there any discussion from members of the board on this amendment? Any further discussion from campuses? Any public comment on this amendment? Seeing no further comment, I will call for the vote. All those in favor of this amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Motion passes. And now I need to go to the original motion stated by Regent Greenfield. Is there any further discussion on the original motion as amended with items 1 and 2, amendments of 1 and 2? Any further discussion from members of the board or campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the original motion as amended signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Madam Chair, could I briefly just say, so there's almost two issues. One is the discussions that have happened at the campus level. Obviously, we've not been involved with those. The second is a policy decision, and I think we've heard in public comment, we've heard from board members, we will, at a commissioner's office level, go back and have that policy discussion as it relates to this item. And ultimately, whether it gets struck or we put in the item itself, some codification of the conversations that seem like they've come and went over the years. We can do all those things. We can put it into the policy, then it's your policy, and that's the way it will live from then on out, and that might take a lot of dissension out of the campus environment. Obviously, those two groups need to work together. That's simple for us to do. We'll commit to that, and we'll reopen those discussions here promptly to get that item back in front of you at an appropriate time to change. I mean, it doesn't need to be part of this. We can amend a policy at any time we want to, so that's easy fix. We'll get those discussions going and bring something back to you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Commissioner. Regent Lozar?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for those remarks. I would just ask that instead of doing this at an appropriate time, that we do this right away, that we look at it either July or September. You know, I don't, like I mentioned, I don't know the details of all the conversations that's happened over the years, but listening to the students and listening to Regent Greenfield, I'd love to have this resolved by the fall, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Regent Nystuen?
Just as an anecdote to that, I think President Bodnar, it'd be important for him to have a voice in this as well. I mean, we've had a big discussion about this morning, and I think it'd be good to hear from you, sir, when this comes up again.
We'll get the appropriate people in the room quickly, and candidly, whether you're a regent or not, you're more than welcome to participate. You probably know this discussion as well as anyone, Regent Greenfield, and we'll get the conversation started now and see if we can't get some resolve that ultimately will land in a policy decision in front of this board.
Great, thank you, and I really appreciate the effort on that. Again, I wanted to push this forward as it was part of what I felt like the work I had done on the fee task force and as a student regent based on the concerns that have been brought to me by students. And so I thank you for entertaining the opportunity at least to vote on that item separately. Expect, if I'm not involved in those discussions, to have a very lengthy comment from me submitted. So at the very least, expect that. Thank you. I won't take up any more time on this item.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Moving on to item D, Montana Tech naming. I would entertain a motion to approve the proposed new name for Montana Tech.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Greenfield. Any discussion from members of the board? Regent Greenfield.
Thanks. I'll be very brief. I'm surprised, honestly, that we haven't had as much discussion on this item. I think this is a very big deal, and I'm very excited for the Montana Technological University to move forward. And I'm excited for the change that we've seen here. And I really just want to say a big congratulations to the campus, and thank you for the hard work that was put in to gather so much feedback and response on this. I think that's why we haven't talked as much about this, is that it's been so thorough. But I'm excited to see this transition move forward for Montana Tech, and I'm grateful for the work they've done to differentiate themselves and truly find their mission and identity.
Further discussion from members of the board? I would like to take the privilege as chair of the board to acknowledge that this is a momentous vote, a momentous historical occasion, and I'm delighted to be part of it. Any further comment, discussions from members of the board or campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Congratulations. Motion passes. Chancellor Blackadder, I think there might be a tear in your eye.
She was looking at the camera.
Was I?
Yeah, trying to get some screen time. Madam Chair, I do want to express my appreciation, obviously to the board for approval, but I want to express appreciation to our campus, to those on the WIRE committee who, these kinds of things are not easy to do, and you have ups and downs, and they have remained firm and steadfast and have listened carefully and been very thoughtful. It's one of the most incredible experiences I've had working with a group of faculty and staff in my 30-some years as a faculty member and administrator. So I just want to express my appreciation to the alumni, the faculty, the staff at Montana Tech, and to the board. Thank you.
Congratulations, and thank you for your diligence, transparency, inclusion on an excellent process that has played out affirmatively with this decision. Thanks so much. Moving on to item E, request to increase tuition and fees for fiscal year 19 for Flathead Valley Community College. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Nicetoon. Any discussion from members of the board? Campuses. Any public comment on this item? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item F, Montana Tech Foundation Operating Agreement. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Tess. Any discussion from members of the board? Campuses. Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. We do not have an action for item G. I will move on to item H. Harrison Hall classroom renovation at MSU. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Lozar. Any discussion from members of the board? Campuses. Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item I, American Indian Center Planning and Design at MSU. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Lozar. Any discussion from members of the board? Campuses? Any public comment on this item? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item J, labor agreements. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Nystuen. Any discussion from members of the board? Regent Greenfield.
Thank you. And again, I want to reiterate that this is an incredibly difficult vote for me to make. As I feel like the representative from shared governance on the board of students, faculty, and staff, it's difficult for me to vote against this, but at this time, I feel that there are conflicting values between what students need and what faculty and staff need. And so that is my reasoning for voting no. I mean, no disrespect to the people who have put the time and effort into creating these bargaining agreements, especially Deputy Commissioner McCray. I know how much time your team has put into this. I genuinely have the most profound respect for our faculty and staff across the system, and know that I vote this way with a heavy heart, but based on the way things are going today so far, it looks like I'm going to be the only one anyways. So thank you.
Any further comment from members of the board? Campuses. Any public comment?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Marco Farrell with MEMFT. I have to tell you that this is the last time I'll be saying that, because MEMFT will not exist after September 1. We have merged with the Montana Public Employees Association, and we will be the Montana Federation of Public Employees as of September 1. And so we will be here representing not only faculty, but your classified staff as well. So I'd like to stand in support of this agenda item. I'd like to thank Deputy Commissioner McCray and his team, and Tammy Harris, our field consultant for higher ed, for the work that they've done on this. These contracts for our contracts represent a lot of hard work, and they have been agreed upon and ratified by our members. So they're in front of you for that ratification. I would urge your vote yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further comment? Any further public comment? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes. We will now move on to the action items under the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee. Item A, Level 2 Executive Summary. I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Nystuen. Any discussion from members of the board? Campuses? Any public comment on this item? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Same sign. Motion passes. Item B, mission statement for the University of Montana, Missoula. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion made by Regent Sheehy. Any discussion from members of the board? Campuses? Any public comment? Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. The next items are information, so that concludes our action items. We have already covered the student appeal. At this point, I would like to turn the mic over to Commissioner Christian, who will conduct the election of officers. Commissioner
Madam
Christian.
Chair, thank you. According to your bylaws, Article 4 of the bylaws, you are to elect a chair and a vice chair in the meeting following May 1 to serve for the next year as in those positions. So at this time, I would like to open up the nominations for chair of the Board of Regents. Regent Tuss.
Commissioner, I would like to place into nomination the name of Fran Albrecht to serve as chair of the Board of Regents.
Thank you, Regent Tuss. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I would close the nomination process. Members of the board, you have before you a nomination for Regent Albrecht to serve as chair for the next calendar year. Is there any discussion on this item? Is there any discussion or feedback from the campuses? Seems risky, but go ahead. Sorry, I digress. Any public comment? Any public comment?
Commissioner, for the record, it's not for the calendar year.
It's, oh, yeah, no, not for the, well, from May 1 to May 1, sorry.
Thank you.
For the next 12 months, sorry. Any public comment? Seeing none, you have a motion before you for Regent Albrecht to serve as chair. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Madam Chair, you've been reelected. Members of the board, at this time, I would like to open the nominations for an individual to serve for the next 12 months as vice chair of the Board of Regents.
Mr.
Regent
Commissioner, seeing that we have 6 individuals and what happened last year, I'd like to nominate myself and Bob at the same time.
Thank you, Regent Lozart.
No, Mr. Commissioner, it's my pleasure to nominate Bob Nystuen.
Thank you, Regent Lozart. Are there any further nominations? Seeing none, I would close the nominations. We have before us a nomination for Regent Nystuen to serve as vice chair. Is there any discussion on that item? Any campus discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, you have before you a nomination for Regent Nystuen to serve as vice chair of the Montana Board of Regents. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Mr. Nystuen, you've been reelected vice chair. Madam Chair, I return the gavel to you. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point in the meeting, I would like to call for public comment. Any public comment? Last call for public comment. We've got a taker.
Hi, members of the board. I'm Gary.
Turn the mic on, please.
If it's on. I'm Gary Garland. I'm the Systems Administrator here. I'd just like to make a quick comment regarding yesterday. You were talking about efforts to continue getting students to come from the elementary education all the way through the university level. I did hear a lot of discussion about fees and ease of transition, but something I did not hear is something I have in my own personal experience. I came out of high school and I didn't have a vision for why I was supposed to college. I just went to college because I was told it's what you do. But with a lack of vision, I've dropped out of college after about 2 years. I had to hit the workforce for another 4 years before I finally found what I really wanted to do. At that point, vision was reignited, and I was able to come back to college and actually complete at that point. So I might want to encourage you that in addition to looking to fees and in addition to looking to making the move through college easy, I'd also encourage to look at how you inspire vision to get the kids to continue going through. And this is just common sense. I have no data to back this up. But I'm willing to bet you would find that a number of retention issues probably relate to students not having vision, just being told, go to college, they get there, don't know why they're there, and then drop out. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Seeing none, I will close this portion of the meeting. And before we adjourn, I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge our outgoing student regent, Regent Greenfield, and to thank you for your incredible diligence as a servant leader on this board, for the time and effort that you have contributed to many facets of the work that we are called to do as a member of the Board of Regents. And I simply can't imagine what it's like to be a student and to take this on at the same time. Your future is bright, and it has been a pleasure working with you. So thank you for your time and your contributions to this board and to the Montana University system. Regent Greenfield.
Thank you.
And I know that you have a couple of comments you'd like to make, but before you do, Regent Sheehy.
Thank you, Chair. I also wanted to thank Chase, and I wanted to do it before he talked because I think Chase is entitled to the last word at his last meeting. Chase, I want to thank you for really just being such an example to all of us. I can't imagine doing this job knowing it's only for a year. And after 4 years, I can count still on one hand the number of things that I have seen through to completion. And looking at your list of accomplishments, I see a presidential search, I see the fee policy, I see program review. It's really incredible what you've done. And the way you've done it is with preparedness. I was telling Chase earlier that many times when I open up my packet, I think, I probably don't have to read that, I probably don't have to do that. But this year I knew that Chase was reading it, and so I read it too, and I read it hard because Chase has held us all to a very high level of preparedness. And I often can kind of tell what the student regent is going to do with his or her life. The path is already kind of in front of them. I have no idea what is going to happen in your life, and I can't wait to watch. So thank you so much for being such a fabulous colleague and for your level of preparedness. I just can't thank you enough.
Thank you. Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I echo several of the comments that Martha mentioned, but the young man that just came and talked about vision and the power of vision, I don't know if you would have been as successful this year as you've been as a student regent if it wasn't for the 2 or 3 or 4 years prior to coming on the Board of Regents. I know you attended meetings, you were keyed in on discussions not only on your campus but across the system, and I really think that allowed you the platform to have confidence and courage to take on other members of the Board of Regents on difficult things where you voted no, and I think it's fantastic, and I think and I know that Governor Bullock made the right choice and an excellent choice in selecting you. I think you've raised the bar not only for the student regent position, but for all of us. And I really wanted to thank you for that. And I look forward to not only seeing where you go and what you become, but I also look forward to your comments on the law student fees as well. So thank you.
Regent Greenfield.
Thank you, and thank you all for the kind words and support you've given me, and for all of the support you've given me, not just this last year, but the last 4 years. And I don't hit on it enough in my comments here, but I truly love everyone in this room, and the Montana University system is a family for me, and will always be. And thank you so much. I hope that not only will you watch where I go, but you'll be a part of that with me. I consider you all like family, so let's keep going together. I'll get to my closing remarks prepared so I don't ramble, because I could talk for a while. It's strange to me, though, in closing that half my title is already gone. In name, I'm still the student regent, though I've lost the more important piece of that already, and lose the regent half in practice today. Serving on this board has honestly been the most incredible honor of my life, and I feel incredibly privileged and lucky to have had this opportunity and the experiences it has afforded me. I'm one of 2 regents sitting who have taken a lap all the way around the university system, and in touring each campus, I've truly come to value just how much the work each person in this room does and how important that is. I recognize the value that it contributes to the state of Montana, what it contributes to the pursuit of knowledge and learning, and to the betterment of humankind. Thank you all for what you have done for my peers and faculty around the room, and especially those who are not here today. Those people are truly the ones that make this university system run and make it so special, and thank you for the people in this room who make that possible. Regent Johnstone, in his closing remarks, made a request for urgency, and I support his message, but bring a different one in my own closing remarks. As I think almost everyone knows, I'm a graduate of the University of Montana with a degree in philosophy and a degree in English literature, so Plato's Apology is pretty much ingrained into my very being at this point in my life. And so I want to quote Socrates in the trial that led to his death, who said, "If I say that it is impossible for me to keep quiet because that means disobeying the God, you will not believe me and will think I am being ironical. On the other hand, if I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living for men, you will believe me even less." Socrates conveys my message to you all in this quote, the paramount significance of self-reflection and examination. In today's world, the Montana University system faces many difficult challenges. Our state funding has begun to decline. Our enrollment levels, for the most part, have also started to drop. Costs are rising, both for people and operations. The dependence on private and grant dollars seems to grow each year. But at the end of the day, the reason we're looking for creative and powerful solutions to these challenges is not for financial or economic reasons. That is to say, we're not for profit. Higher enrollment doesn't serve the goal of more money in any of our pockets. It means a better, fuller, richer life for a few more of Montana's students. We fight for solutions to our problems because we believe in a value that goes beyond dollars and cents, and we cannot forget this fact in the face of our challenges. This is why I push for public higher education. This is why, above all else, I aspire to be a lifelong learner and a student. This is why I study in the humanities. The unexamined life is not worth living for men, and I consider the greatest gift that the Montana University system has afforded me are the moments of self-reflection and experience of that nature that has been afforded to me. I often tell people that philosophy woke me up, that as if I'd been dreaming for a really long time. But what I don't tell people usually is that it's a constant effort to stay awake. We live in a world focused on consumption and possession, a world in which self-examination and self-reflection have little or no place. As stewards of education, we must not forget what it is we value and why we will continue to push for it. We must continue to awaken our own students and to stay awake ourselves. So this is my message to you, the Montana University system, in my last few moments as your student regent. Never stop reflecting on what it is that is truly important. Like the good future educator that I hope to be, I have some assigned reading for some of my friends around the table here. I've assigned Andrew Del Blanco's College, What It Was, Is, and Should Be, a book I read for my very fitting literature capstone course called Crisis in the Humanities. I hope you all take the time to enjoy this wonderful perspective on what it is we're all doing here, because I certainly did. Part of me is absolutely devastated that my time on the Board of Regents has concluded and that my term is ending. But like my hero Socrates, I will not pretend to be wise when I know I am not. to paraphrase his closing remarks at the end of the trial that ended his life over 2,000 years ago. Now the hour to come has part. I go on to a new set of trials and adventures while you continue your service here. Which of us goes to the better lot is known to no one except the God.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to go ahead and adjourn this very important and fulfilling meeting with incredible actions and so much to celebrate, especially for the fantastic host of Chancellor Kegel and his team, and the outstanding accomplishments of Montana State University Northern. Thank you so much for hosting us. Thank you for all the work you're doing, and congratulations as you forge ahead. Thank you all for joining us, and safe travels.